The teenage years are the most challenging of all the stages of growing up. Not a child anymore, but not yet an adult, this time can be characterized. The body undergoes a massive hormonal overhaul, further complicating this transitional period. Yesterday's obedient child becomes unstable and prone to rebellion. A teenager's worldview is a picture of contrasts consisting of black and white tones. The prevailing color in a teen's judgments and actions largely depends on their environment. The story we're about to discuss occurred in Medicine Hat, in the southeast of Alberta, Canada. Incomprehensible cruelty and betrayal befell the Richardson family. Their tragedy gained national attention, and once again, the Gothic subculture came under fire. In town, the Richardson family was considered exemplary. Debra and Marc, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, lived in a beautiful and cozy place. Like all Canadians, they were very hospitable and sociable. Their home was often filled with guests, and the atmosphere was built on principles of love and respect. Everything was going well until the eldest daughter entered puberty. The once calm girl changed beyond recognition. First and foremost, Jasmine's character changed. She became bold and frivolous. Conflicts between her and her parents began to occur, and her academic performance dropped. Secondly, her preferences in music and clothing transformed. Whereas she previously enjoyed modern pop, she now took an interest in heavy rock. Bright colors in clothing were replaced by shades of gray and black, and her dressing style became provocative. Jasmine wanted to appeal to boys, so she began to emphasize her rounded shapes. Her interaction with former friends noticeably decreased. She began to spend more time alone in front of her computer screen. The door to her room was often closed. With the introduction of the internet at home, she became interested in Gothic themes, dark poetry, criminal psychology, and human anatomy. Miss Richardson even identified herself as a witch, preaching the Wiccan religion. For this purpose, she visited various websites of similar nature, where she found a circle of friends who shared her interests. "Welcome to my tragic world," was the greeting on her social media page. It seemed like a typical adolescence, spiced with excessive dramatism and mysticism. However, the girl became more and more detached from her family. In her profile, she listed a fictitious name and age of 15. She liked older interlocutors, wanting to match them. Her parents tried to support their daughter during this difficult period, suggesting spending time together. They looked for common ground, activities. However, she found this uninteresting. Jasmine considered her younger brother to be an annoying nuisance. Thus, she spoke to him less and less. Yet she could spend hours on end at the computer, talking to strangers. Debra and Marc understood that this state was temporary. She would grow up, become wiser. Therefore, they were quite tolerant of her new hobbies. One day, Jasmine told them she would like to go to a concert of a punk rock band. Her parents agreed, if only they knew what this outing would lead to. Early 2006, Jasmine Richardson went to a concert of a local youth band, pursuing her own interests, knowing he would be there. Jeremy Steinke, the boy who had been stirring her heart for months, he too was fascinated by Gothic culture. They met on a vampire enthusiast's website, where they occasionally communicated. Jeremy portrayed himself as a 300-year-old werewolf thirsting for blood. To prove it, he wore a vial of blood around his neck, though it was unclear whether the fluid was of human or animal origin. Nonetheless, the boy clearly considered himself special, which Jasmine found very appealing. Meeting at the concert, the young people grew even fonder of each other. Eventually, Steinke asked her out, and she joyfully accepted. All would be fine, except Jeremy was 23 years old. The couple knew her parents would disapprove of their relationship, so they kept it a secret. Moreover, his troubled past would hardly endear him to them. The young man was poor and lived in a trailer with his mother and sister. His relationship with his mother was strained due to her excessive drinking. Jeremy had endured her constant stream of volatile partners who often beat him in their drunken rages. As a result, by the age of 13, he was struggling academically and had a fragile psyche. Once, unable to bear such a life, Steinke attempted to hang himself, but was fortunately stopped in time. Afterward, doctors diagnosed him with depression and hyperactivity. Bullied at school, he decided to stop attending. Over time, Jeremy fancied himself immortal and began frequenting websites of similar themes. His online profile was filled with topics like pain, self-harm, blood, and razor blades. No one knew about the couple's forbidden relationship except their friends, who found their love, to say the least, peculiar. Their communication would have remained a secret had the Richardsons not started monitoring their daughter's excessive internet use. Debra and Marc discovered Jasmine was corresponding with strangers, alarming them as any parent would. Therefore, they decided to remove the computer from the girl's reach. Moreover, they were shocked to learn she had fallen for an adult man with dubious interests. His very nickname, Soul Eater, spoke volumes. Thus, Jasmine and Jeremy's relationship became forbidden. To help their daughter break free from this destructive relationship, Debra and Marc sought a psychologist's help. They sincerely believed that counseling would benefit their parent-child relationship. To their delight, it did. Jasmine showed compliance and seemed to be returning to a normal life. Promising that it was all in the past, she got her computer back. This became the Richardsons' last fateful decision, leading to their demise. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Preparing for bed, Mrs. Richardson heard a noise in the basement. "Rats again," she thought. Descending, she turned on the light and saw a person in a ski mask. He stood opposite her, looking at her. Startled, she screamed. The stranger rushed at her, covering her mouth. His efforts were in vain. Debra struggled and screamed louder. He stepped back, drew a knife, and stabbed her in the chest, then again and again. Hearing his wife's screams, Marc rushed down, grabbing the first thing he could find, a screwdriver. He had been fixing an outlet that day and by sheer chance left the tool out. Entering the basement, he was met with a horrific scene, his wife lying in a pool of blood and someone standing next to her. Marc immediately attacked the intruder but received a stab wound to the stomach, followed by more stabs. As the searing pain subsided and his eyes began to close, Mr. Richardson quietly asked, "Why?" "Because your daughter wished it," the attacker replied. Upstairs, Tyler was the only one left. The boy sat on his bed in his pajamas, too frightened to move. The approaching footsteps grew louder, and the bedroom door opened. A few days before the murder, Jasmine was overjoyed. Her parents believed in her remorse, meaning they could now communicate again. Mobile phones were just becoming popular at that time, so the computer remained the only means of communication. As soon as Miss Richardson regained internet access, she immediately wrote to Jeremy. "It all starts with them disappearing and ends with us staying together," she told him. During the days when the young lady was visiting the psychologist, a terrible plan had formed in her head. It solidified over several days of punishment. Surprisingly, Steinke found it enticing, but added that everything needed to be done creatively and with attention to detail. The couple understood that they could not be together as long as the Richardsons were alive. Later, Jasmine's friends recalled how often she spoke about her parents, particularly how much they annoyed her. Therefore, she wanted to end their lives. However, no one took Jasmine's words seriously. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Garrett headed across the street to his friend Tyler's house. The boy wanted to play. The weather was nice outside, despite being chilly. Such was the spring that year. When Garrett approached the house, he noticed the blinds were still closed. No one answered his knock on the door. Strange, he thought. The Richardsons should be home. Their car is parked in the driveway. Hoping to see someone, the child curiously peeked into the living room window but saw no one. Then, Garrett decided to walk around to the back of the basement, where he often played with Tyler. Peeking through the window, he saw something strange on the floor. It appeared to be two silhouettes in a pool of blood, the boy informed his mother. Skeptical, she decided to check on the family across the street. They approached the house together. Garrett pointed to the window he had looked through earlier. The woman looked in and recoiled in horror. She immediately called emergency services. Something happened at the Richardsons. They seemed to be lying in the basement floor, all in blood, the neighbor reported. The police arrived promptly. Breaking down the front door, they descended to where Garrett and his mother had seen something. Entering the dark basement, the officers had difficulty recognizing the people lying on the ground. Their bodies were mutilated and bloodied. But there was no doubt. It was Marc and Debra Richardson, and they were deceased. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, even the ceiling. A bloody mess. No other way to describe what was before them. Later, the police searched the house. In the upstairs children's room, they found a small child. The boy lay in bed among toys, splattered with blood with visible knife wounds. The child's throat had been deeply cut. Medicine Hat had never seen such horror. One officer said, "It will take me decades to forget what I saw today." After the house was searched, the police realized one family member was missing. The Richardsons' eldest daughter was gone. Officers worried she might be in danger. Everything indicated the attack occurred in the basement and the child's room. The rest of the house was undisturbed, and at first glance, nothing was missing. The state of the bodies suggested the crime occurred the previous night. Apparently, the perpetrator broke into the house and attacked the boy and his parents. Then what happened to Jasmine? And where was she? The police began to construct theories about what had happened. Perhaps by some stroke of luck, the girl was somewhere outside the home, safe. Or the perpetrator had abducted her and was now harming her. Or maybe a ransom demand from relatives would come with time. However, as time passed, there were no clear answers. Soon, detectives turned to the media, requesting help in the search for the missing girl. They hoped Jasmine would make contact or someone would provide valuable information. Meanwhile, the investigation into the crime continued. Investigators interviewed relatives, friends, and colleagues about all aspects of the slain family's life. Did they have any adversaries or enemies capable of such a heinous act? However, the more the investigation progressed, the clearer it became. There was no reason to wish death upon anyone in the Richardson family. They were truly wonderful people, faithful spouses and loving parents, except for the eldest daughter. Officers learned that the girl had been causing quite a bit of trouble lately. Therefore, the tone of media announcements changed. This time, the investigation wanted to locate a person of interest. It was entirely possible that the girl knew details about the crime, or she might have been involved in it. Considering the suspect's age, the media could no longer publish her real name, as per Canadian law. Thus, news agencies began to refer to Jasmine Richardson as JR. After it became known about her relationship with Jeremy Steinke, the couple was declared wanted. Initially, the search for the young lovers began among their friends and acquaintances, thinking they might be hiding out with them. However, this lead proved to be a dead end for the police, but they did uncover something intriguing. A few hours after the crime, the young couple was spotted at a restaurant and at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Someone from their circle of friends mentioned that Jasmine appeared unchanged. There was no indication she had been abducted or was in a state of shock. She was drinking and having fun. When friends asked how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed. "Jeremy and I just took care of them." "Yes," the boy agreed. "I carved them up like fish." The party guests laughed, thinking it a grim joke, unaware that the statement was true. The involvement in the crime was also confirmed by a comic found in Jasmine's school locker, where she detailed how she would deal with each of her family members, with her boyfriend as her accomplice. Photos of the suspects were distributed widely. It was only a matter of time before a citizen would step forward with information about their whereabouts. Soon enough, information came in. The couple was spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, approximately 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat. Caught off guard, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke were found sleeping peacefully in a pickup truck. Without resistance, they were taken to the police station. Naturally, the couple was interrogated separately, starting with Jasmine. She shared that she was deeply in love with Steinke, and he reciprocated her feelings. However, the difference in age and social status was a barrier between them. According to Jasmine, the Richardsons would never have accepted their relationship. Therefore, Jeremy committed the ultimate act of love. He ended her parents' lives, providing them the chance to be together. When detectives asked if Jasmine was involved in the crime, she said, "I wasn't home when the crimes occurred. I didn't know about what had happened. After I found out, I accepted it. I loved Jeremy very much, so I ran away with him." Detectives needed to determine who was the main instigator. Since breaking the suspects proved difficult, the investigation used a cunning strategy. They placed an informant in the cell with Jeremy, who skillfully extracted details that contradicted Jasmine's statements. Jeremy confessed to the informant that the plan to end her parents' lives was Jasmine's idea. Initially, he was not supportive, but agreed after they discovered the forbidden love and took away her computer. "I took care of Debra and Marc Richardson, and Jasmine took care of her younger brother herself. She literally begged me to leave Tyler for her, though I was glad to settle scores with all of them," Jeremy cruelly revealed. After this confession, investigators confronted Miss Richardson with the recording. She had no choice but to confess to everything, admitting she stabbed her younger brother out of mercy, not wanting to leave him an orphan. Later, the couple shared their social media profiles and passwords with the investigation, which began to examine their correspondence. They had sent each other thousands of messages, confirming Jeremy's statements. Jasmine indeed conceived the plan on her own. Steinke wrote that Jasmine was the only person who supported and approved of his tastes, replacing the society he felt alienated from. Fearing he would lose her, he helped realize the dreadful idea. "I want to slit their throats. They will regret what they have done, especially when I make sure they're gone. They'll pay for the insults. Finally, there will be silence. Their blood will be the payment." Jeremy supported his beloved. His friends also reported that just a few hours before the attack, they watched the 1994 film Natural Born Killers, which portrays a couple committing 9 heinous murders. This story inspired their friend, who said he wanted to enact a similar plan with his girlfriend. "I think it's the best love story of all time," Steinke said. With sufficient evidence at hand, the suspects were charged with 3 counts of homicide. The detectives pieced together the confessions of the accused, witness testimonies, and other case evidence to form a clear picture of the crime. Before the act, Jeremy was intoxicated. Jasmine led him into the house and guided him to the basement, where he attacked her mother. Debra was the first to die, suffering 12 stab wounds across her body. The deepest wound pierced her chest, reaching 12 centimeters deep and striking her heart. In a rage, Jeremy mercilessly continued his assault on Marc, who sustained 24 wounds, 9 of which were in the back. Like his wife, the family patriarch bled out on the basement floor. Tyler Richardson was the last to die. While Steinke was dealing with the parents downstairs, Jasmine inflicted 5 stab wounds on her younger brother upstairs. After Jeremy finished, he went upstairs to help his girlfriend with the child, coldly slashing the boy's throat as if carving a pumpkin. Afterward, Jeremy went home to wash off the blood, while Jasmine caught a taxi to a restaurant where the couple had agreed to meet. After discussing the night's events, they headed to a party. A friend of Jeremy's, Casey Lancaster, helped them dispose of the evidence and reach Saskatchewan. Words fail to describe the horror they created. The couple embarked on their murderous spree with such ease and nonchalance as if driven by some otherworldly force. It is shocking that during interrogations and their time in custody, not a word of regret or remorse was uttered for their actions. While detained, they wrote letters to each other, calling themselves legends and immortals. In one letter, Steinke proposed to Richardson, who joyfully accepted. Then, unexpectedly, their mad love began to fade like last year's snow. During the trial, they shifted the blame onto each other. In June 2007, Jasmine Richardson was the first to stand trial. She pleaded not guilty, claiming to have been in a zombie-like state and unable to act while Jeremy was killing her family. She also claimed she only wounded her younger brother, and it was Steinke who delivered the fatal blow. Jasmine insisted that their discussions about ending her parents' lives were purely hypothetical, But they appealed to Jeremy so much that he compelled her to turn them into reality. Under 3 counts of homicide, Miss Richardson was sentenced to just 10 years in prison, thanks to the nuances of Canadian juvenile criminal justice law, which states that individuals under 14 cannot be sentenced to more than 10 years of imprisonment. The sentence was aimed more at rehabilitating and restoring the girl's psyche than punishing her. In 2008, Jeremy Steink's trial commenced. He insisted he had no initial intention of ending the lives of his girlfriend's parents. However, once discovered in the basement, he felt compelled to attack. He claimed he did not harm Tyler, suggesting Jasmine was responsible while he merely watched from the doorway. The defense argued that Jasmine had intentionally seduced him, wishing for him to free her from her parents' strict control. Some friends testified that Jeremy had sought their help with the act, driven by his fear of losing Jasmine to the extent of being willing to do anything. The lawyers also requested the charges be reduced to manslaughter, arguing Steinke was under the influence of substances at the time of the act. Steinke's inconsistencies emerged when, asked by the prosecution why he committed the act, he replied, "When you find your other half, you do whatever it takes for them." Throughout the trial, he remained indifferent to the proceedings, but broke down when Jacqueline May, his mother, testified in his defense. She admitted to bearing significant guilt for his upbringing, as he was often attacked by her partners, subjected to beatings and rejection. Steinke was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree homicide, receiving 3 life sentences. He would be eligible for parole no earlier than 25 years later, in 2033. Charges of complicity in the act against Casey Lancaster were dropped. In Medicine Hat Court, she was found guilty of obstruction of justice, sentenced to a year of house arrest, and prohibited from consuming drugs and alcohol. While in custody, Jeremy Steinke changed his name to Jackson May. Jasmine Richardson's 10-year sentence included 4 years in a psychiatric facility, where she was diagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, indicative of a refusal to follow rules and socially unacceptable behavior, typically more associated with children than adults. This underscored her psychological immaturity and instability during her relationship with Steinke. In her final years under conditional community supervision and attending special programs, medical professionals reported her genuine remorse. After serving her full sentence, she was released in 2016. Currently, Jasmine Richardson lives in Canada under an assumed name. Her true identity still protected from media disclosure. Her return sparked significant public debate, with some arguing she deserved a second chance, while others believe she warranted a harsher penalty. Nonetheless, the residents of Medicine Hat would prefer not to have Miss Richardson as their neighbor again, given the brutality of her crime. Whether Jasmine has truly changed after spending her formative years in detention remains to be seen. Time will tell. The case of Paula Ortega. In early 2023, the city of Sangolquí in Ecuador's Pichincha region was rocked by a tragic incident. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that shocked the community, but its motive, a mere $600 theft. Could the life of 37-year-old Paula Ortega Alcocer really be valued at just $600? Born in March 1986, Paula was the second child in a large family. She excelled at Dario Figueroa Lara School and later attended the Polytechnic University, where she developed a keen interest in the hospitality industry. After her studies, Paula actively contributed to the growth of her family's business, which specialized in party goods manufacturing. The Ortega Alcocer family was well-to-do and renowned in Sangolquí and neighboring Ecuadorian towns. Paula's father, in his youth, began building a business supplying party goods across Ecuador. The venture became quite successful, enabling him to start his own production of balloons, piñatas, and other festive paraphernalia. This expansion led to the opening of several stores. The Alcocer family's party shops were located not only in Sangolquí, but also in Ecuador's capital, Quito. Each family member played a role in the development and maintenance of their enterprise. The father expanded the main production line, opening new workshops for balloons, garlands, caps, and various party items. Each of the 3 children managed a store, tailoring it to their vision. Paula's entrepreneurial spirit led her beyond just managing a store. She organized a party planning service within the company, which turned out to be a great success. It seemed Paula had found her calling, bringing joy to people, which made her truly happy. While the business ventures of the Ortega family flourished for a long time, unfortunately, Paula Ortega's personal life was not as successful. Despite her youthful and joyous demeanor, she faced significant hardships in her private life. Paula's first marriage to Carlos Pedro turned out to be unhappy. After the birth of their daughter, Carlos developed an alcohol addiction. He began disappearing from home and stealing money from Paula's store. His infidelity was the last straw, leading Paula to end the marriage and find herself alone with her daughter. This period was particularly challenging for Paula, as she lost hope in finding personal happiness. However, the psychological support of her family and her passion for her work helped her regain a sense of normalcy in her life. A decade later, Paula met Christian Diego. A tall, dark-haired, and handsome man, Christian was 4 years younger than Paula. Having lost faith in finding a worthy partner, Paula was cautious with the persistent young suitor. Christian proved to be calm and reliable, quickly bonding with Paula's daughter, which greatly impressed Paula. After 2 years of relationship, her heart warmed to him, leading to a beautiful wedding ceremony. Christian embraced Paula's daughter as his own, and they soon welcomed another daughter, Maria. Christian and Paula spent 5 years together, with Christian fully integrating into Paula's father's company. He was entrusted with finding locations for new stores, which often kept him away from home. Coming from a modest working-class family, Christian had always dreamed of owning a large business. Unfortunately, some people can conceal their dark sides so well that one might live for years alongside ruthless criminals without suspecting a thing. However, the truth eventually comes to light when evil erupts in the most unexpected ways. Paula Ortega and her husband, Christian, appeared to be the epitome of a happy, successful couple to their family, friends, and neighbors. However, this perception was only surface deep. In 2000, Paula's father passed away after a long illness. His death not only devastated the family, but also turned their business upside down. Christian, driven by a desire for power and the wealth it brought, eagerly sought to take Paula's father's place in the business. However, his lack of skill led to one failed deal after another. As a result, Christian began to vent his frustration on his family. Initially in secret, but later openly, he began to abandon his family, indulging in a life of debauchery. Women and alcohol became his escape into a world of pleasure and recklessness. With Paula's father no longer there to restrain him, Christian's true nature began to surface. Having already experienced a traumatic marriage, Paula refused to endure this behavior again. The couple's home became a battleground of endless scandals, revealing Christian's true nature as an ambitious egotist, craving only power and unquestioned obedience. After a particularly nasty argument, Paula secretly filed for divorce, fearing her husband's reaction. The news of this drastically changed Christian's behavior. Unwilling to lose his place in the successful family, he stopped his outrageous conduct and appeared to transform for the better. He expressed remorse, claiming to be caught up in a whirlwind of confusion, and professed his love and value for his family. His eloquence persuaded Paula. Not wanting to be alone again, she gave him a second chance. In a gesture of reconciliation, Christian suggested organizing a romantic dinner at their home. Paula agreed. She sent their daughters to her parents' house and began preparing for the evening. Inside, she was aflutter with excitement. Deep down, she still dreamed of a happy, strong family and was doing everything she could to preserve it. The evening at the Ortega home was one of celebration and comfort. The living room was lit up with festive garlands, and the dining table was warmly illuminated by the yellow glow of candles. Christian uncorked a bottle of dry white wine while Paula served a hot meal. The night could have been genuinely reconciliatory, had it not been for a sudden proposal from Christian that disrupted the peace. Christian, a co-owner of the Alcozar company, revealed to his wife a significant misstep. In his pursuit to replace Paula's father and gain full control, he had made a costly mistake in an important tender, leading to substantial losses for the company. Now, the firm desperately needed a new investor, implying that a part of the company would officially change hands. Paula was adamantly against this, believing her father's business should remain a family affair. Despite Christian's persuasion, she stood her ground, infuriating him. He had already found an investor and was eager to complete the deal without complications. Their dinner, and by extension their relationship, soured. January 2nd, 2023, seemed like any other day. Paula took her younger daughter to the playroom before heading to her shop for work. She had a large order to prepare, involving assembling balloon fountains and party decorations for a themed event. During her lunch break, 2 men knocked on the shop's door. Although closed, Paula opened it, expecting a courier to pick up the balloon bouquets. The men, slim and dressed identically as if they were twins, startled her with their dark hoodies. They lingered, scanning the shop before splitting up. As Paula called out to them, stating the shop was closed for lunch, they cornered her against the wall. The tension of this silent scene was broken by a knock on the glass door. The men hastily exited the shop. A smiling young courier arrived, unwittingly rescuing Paula from the unknown assailants. Shaken, Paula handed over the package, closed the shop, and with trembling hands, called her mother. She was visibly frightened, a sentiment she expressed over the phone. Paula's mother suggested reporting the unsettling incident at her shop to the police, but Paula declined, attributing her reaction to mere fright since nothing harmful had actually occurred. She didn't reopen her shop that day, her thoughts consumed by Christian's actions and the identity and motives of the 2 mysterious men. Seeking solace, Paula decided to take a stroll through the city. She stopped at a nearby cafe for some coffee, walked through the park to breathe in the fresh air, and then visited her sister. Over cups of fragrant tea, they engaged in a heart-to-heart conversation. Overwhelmed by the day's shocking events, Paula confided in her sister not only about the scary encounter at her shop, but also about the difficulties in her marriage. She shared how Christian had drastically changed after her father's passing, indulging in alcohol and openly being unfaithful. Paula chose not to mention his proposal about merging the company with a new investor, as she habitually kept her personal struggles to herself. But that day, her emotions overpowered her pride and shame over tolerating such demeaning treatment. He's a peculiar being. My sister was lively, happy, cheerful, enterprising, hardworking, an extremely gentle and kind mother. She should have been receiving energy from him, Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, would later say. Paula spoke of her long-term life plans, her desire for her daughters to grow up and become professionals, and her intention to continue her business. She was selfless and tirelessly hardworking, Adriana recalled. After her emotional talk with her sister, Paula headed home. A phone call from Christian interrupted her. He was picking up their daughter from the playroom and would come to the shop to pick her up as well. His hurried speech was interspersed with children's voices. Paula didn't get a chance to tell him about the frightening incident at her shop, especially since she suspected him to be involved. Reluctantly, Paula returned to work, once again prioritizing her family's well-being over her own. She didn't have to wait long. Christian arrived alone, explaining that their daughter had wanted to go home, and he couldn't deny his little princess. He informed Paula that the girls were at home and eagerly waiting for hamburgers for dinner. In what has become a modern family tradition, Christian took Paula not to the nearest fast food joint, but to a restaurant courtyard at a shopping center, several blocks from their home. Parking the car beside a secluded wall and locking it securely, he left Paula inside to collect their order. Relaxing in the passenger seat after a taxing day, Paula closed her eyes, unaware of the impending danger. Shortly, she recognized 2 familiar figures near the car, talking loudly and circling the vehicle. Recognizing them as the unexpected visitors from her shop, Paula tried to stay calm, trusting that the car was secure and Christian would return soon. Suddenly, the car's lights flashed and the door locks disengaged. In a panic, Paula scrambled to the back seat, hiding between the seats and covering her head with her arms, but she was trapped with no escape. One intruder casually got into the driver's seat while the other joined him in the back, pinning Paula down even more. She felt something warm trickling down her arm before darkness enveloped her. Paula sustained 11 knife wounds to her neck and 2 to her face. After the brutal attack, the assailants fled the scene, leaving Paula alone and gravely injured. Christian returned just 7 minutes later to a horrific sight. The car's interior was drenched in blood. Frantically, he called emergency services, but struggled to clearly communicate the situation and give emergency coordinates. He then called Paula's mother to report the attack before driving to the hospital himself. Tragically, Paula succumbed to her injuries in the emergency room, passing away before receiving necessary medical attention. Christian, overwhelmed by grief and shock at the loss of his wife, reacted with loud cries and throwing chairs in the waiting room. The sudden violent end of Paula Ortega left a community in shock and a family in profound grief, raising questions about the motive and identity of the attackers. The initial theory of the prosecution was a violent end inflicted during a robbery. It was later discovered that $600 and a gold necklace were missing from Paula's purse. This began an investigation. The prosecution's theory was confirmed when footage from city cameras showed two unknown men who had visited Paula's store earlier that day in the vicinity. Both were in hoodies, making it impossible to create a clear image of their faces, and their vague descriptions provided no clarity. 2 months after the tragic event, Paula's family demanded justice, but the investigation was at a standstill. A turning point came when Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, gave testimony casting doubt on Christian's innocence. She informed the investigators about a conversation she had with Paula on the day of the incident. Adriana also mentioned that Christian regularly committed infidelity and domestic violence against Paula, who was contemplating divorce. This provided a perfect motive, as Christian, driven by ambition, could not afford to lose his wealth and status in the event of a divorce. The prosecution investigated this angle. During a search of their home, incriminating messages were found on Christian's phone, indicating multiple affairs and turbulent marital relations. A critical piece of evidence was documentation prepared for the transfer of the company to a private individual, which Paula had refused to sign. Following these revelations, the incident was investigated as a suspected homicide, as the prosecution continued to gather information implicating Christian Diego. New evidence emerged, unraveling the complex web of the couple's relationship. 2 weeks after the incident, we found out he transferred $2,000 to an unknown woman's account, said Adriana, Paula's sister, adding another layer of suspicion to the already convoluted case. The most shocking aspect, as claimed by relatives, was that Christian made a payment using Paula's account while she was dying from her injuries. Instead of immediately helping his gravely wounded wife, Christian seemingly bided his time. Investigations confirmed this information. The identity of the woman who received the transfer from Christian that day was established as 28-year-old Laura Castillo. Urgently summoned for questioning, she revealed that she had noticed her bank card missing a couple of days earlier, but didn't think much of it, as her brother often used her card. The electronic payment records showed a transfer of $2,000 from Christian on January 2nd at 20:05. However, Laura denied any acquaintance with Christian. Her solid alibi at the time of the incident absolved her of any involvement. She was released, and the investigation hit a dead end again. Days later, Laura returned to the police, stating her brother had returned the bank card, as she had suspected. She provided a full description of her brother's appearance, which matched one of the criminals caught on surveillance cameras near the car. In the chaos of fleeing the crime scene, one attacker forgot to pull up his hood. The identities of Byron and Mortines Castillo, two repeat offenders with a substantial criminal history, were established. The brothers were apprehended. But what could possibly link two seasoned criminals to a seemingly respectable and successful family man? Further investigation revealed that the attacks on Paula had been carried out repeatedly by the Castillo brothers. But why were these repeat offenders targeting this young woman? On December 8, 2022, Paula Ortega faced a harrowing incident at a gas station when her car was stolen. Distracted by a young man, his accomplice quickly jumped behind the wheel and sped off. Fortunately, her daughters weren't in the car that day. Surveillance footage identified the two familiar culprits. Coincidentally, on the day of the theft, Paula unknowingly came face to face with her future assailant. However, the car theft case took an unexpected turn when Christian intervened, claiming the thieves had contacted him. He met with them and retrieved all of Paula's personal belongings, including her wallet. This development cast further doubt on Christian's innocence. Seasoned investigators were puzzled by the widower's boldness in shielding the criminals. Surveillance cameras played a crucial role in identifying the carjackers. As Christian realized he was under suspicion, he concocted a new defense narrative involving extortion by two criminal brothers demanding a large sum of money. But before he could deploy his version of events, the police executed a swift interrogation strategy. Separating the suspects and suggesting one had confessed, they obtained a confession from Martin Castillo. He admitted that more than 2 months earlier, Christian had paid them $2,000 to murder his wife, promising another $2,000 after the deed. During a reenactment, Martin demonstrated how he inflicted 11 fatal knife wounds on the terrified woman. Realizing the crime was uncovered, he remorselessly divulged all details of their arrangement with Christian. Martin revealed that the car theft and the attack on Paula's shop were also parts of Christian's plan to pressure her. By chance, Paula lived a few hours longer than intended. On November 29, 2023, all 3 suspects appeared in court. The prosecution presented a comprehensive picture of the murder day, pieced together from various sources. Videos from surveillance cameras in the area where Christian parked the car, subjected to audio and video forensic analysis, unveiled a chilling, soul-freezing narrative. In chilling surveillance footage, Christian Diego is seen exiting his car and heading towards a shopping center elevator. Moments later, he remotely unlocks his car from half a block away, allowing 2 assailants to enter the vehicle and attack Paula. The prosecutor's report noted Christian's odd behavior post-attack, repeatedly looking back, approaching the car, pausing, returning, pacing back and forth, and making phone calls. Surprisingly, upon finding his wife bleeding profusely, he showed no shock or urgency to help her, instead driving her to a distant hospital. Christian's actions, meticulously reconstructed from surveillance videos, particularly in the first 4 minutes after Paula's attack, were cold and calculating. As she bled in the car but was still alive, Christian, standing nearby, callously transferred money to his accomplices for the assault. Paula's family lawyers urged the court to consider these videos as aggravating factors in the crime. The reconstructed sequence of events presented in court proves the crime was premeditated. Hours before the attack, around 1:30 p.m., 2 individuals entered Paula's store, dropped off nearby by Christian. This implies the crime was intended to occur earlier, during the lunchtime closure, when Paula was alone. Prosecutor Marlon Calderon highlighted inconsistencies. How did the assailants know the couple would be at the eatery if they weren't tailing them? Yet they arrived on time to commit the crime. Christian's actions, not fully raising the car window, unlocking the doors near the eatery, his 1,000 times pacing before aiding his wife, phone calls, and not seeking immediate medical attention at a nearby clinic are key evidence for charging him with orchestrating the femicide. Femicide, defined as the intentional murder of a woman simply because she is a woman, was a central theme in the trial of Christian and Paula Ortega's troubled relationship. Shockingly present in today's society, this hate crime was exemplified through Christian's younger age, which seemed to fuel his contempt and abuse towards Paula. Despite her success, Paula lived in a metaphorical golden cage, masking and enabling her husband's tyrannical behavior, allowing him to assert dominance. Years of silence culminated in Christian's sinister plot to seize control of Paula's thriving party empire and gain sole guardianship of their daughter, Maria. Testimonies from over 10 witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, alongside thorough examination of internal and external family communications, revealed Christian's true motives and objectives. Without legal signing rights, he sought to coerce Paula into transferring her company shares. However, his plan failed. Christian didn't physically harm Paula but inflicted severe psychological abuse, artfully concealed under the guise of a perfect family life. According to the Prosecutor General's report, video evidence led to Christian's preventive isolation as the crime's orchestrator. This measure isn't an arrest but a strategy to neutralize a societal threat. Following this action, Christian planned to flee. In the high-profile case against Christian Diego, accused of orchestrating his wife's demise, his defense team worked tirelessly to portray him as a victim. However, They were unable to refute crucial evidence like surveillance footage and falsified company transfer documents. Desperate, the defense then attempted to depict the accused as suffering from a mental disorder, citing episodes of sudden rage. Multiple psychiatrists evaluated Christian, but he was declared competent. His defense counsel, realizing the gravity of the situation, advised Christian to flee the country, asking if his passport was ready and suggesting he buy a ticket to Panama for the next day. However, this plan to escape justice failed. Christian's search for Central American flight tickets raised alarm bells with the authorities. The prosecutor swiftly ordered an 8-hour detainment of Christian Diego, followed by charges and the disclosure of case details to a judge specializing in domestic violence cases. Pending trial, the suspect was held in preliminary detention, pursued as the alleged mastermind behind the heinous act that left 2 young children motherless and an entire family grieving an irreplaceable loss. The Ortega family demands justice for this atrocious crime, emphasizing the devastating impact on the children and their irreplaceable loss. In a case that gripped public attention, the jury concluded that Christian and his 2 accomplices were guilty of a meticulously planned, intentional act of extreme brutality. The unremorseful Christian and his associates were sentenced to 26 years in prison. The municipal authorities of Rumiñahui expressed their solidarity with the tragic loss of Paula Alcocer. The institution extends its deepest sympathies to the family and friends affected by this incident. The unfortunate demise of this esteemed businesswoman, friend, mother, and wife, who contributed significantly to the canton's development and brought prosperity to those in her circle, is deeply mourned, their statement read. Paula's case emerged as a prominent instance of violence against women, following the Latin American Association for Alternative Development's report of 332 fatalities due to gender-based violence in 2022. The Irene Cortez case, an unfortunate accident or a contracted murder of a mother of many. They say a scorned woman is capable of unpredictable and desperate acts, with cold and cruel revenge being the most fearsome. But what about a scorned man? Many would say an offended man might resort to physical violence, drown his sorrows in alcohol, or combine these 2 scenarios. Yet men, generally less grudge-holding, can be more ingenious when it comes to revenge. The case of Irene Cortez, a Spanish citizen who met a mysterious end during a trip to Colombia, is complex and ambiguous. While her perpetrators were caught, convicted, and are currently serving long sentences, the deceased woman's family claims the real culprit remains at large and is portraying himself as a victim. Let's delve into this intricate story from the beginning and try to determine if a third party was involved, or if the murder was, indeed, unintentional. It's worth noting that each party involved is still trying to prove their version of the truth. Who was Irene Cortez? Irene Cortez, born Lucas, was born in 1980 in sunny Granada, Spain, the capital of the province of the same name. She grew up in a well-off family with a brother and sister. Her parents ran a small but profitable business. According to some reports, her father passed away early, but her mother, Maria Lucas, took over the business operations, expanded the enterprise, and ensured her children lacked for nothing. Maria's older brother, Uncle Pedro Lucas, was also a significant help. Irene was the eldest of the 3 children. A beautiful and sociable girl, she loved being the center of attention and attracted boys from an early age. Shortly after finishing school, she married and was already pregnant. At 17, she became a mother for the first time, and 2 years later, she had her second child. Her mother and uncle provided considerable support, allowing her to pursue a good education despite early motherhood. In the early 2000s, Irene moved to the resort city of Malaga with her husband and 2 children. There, she opened an entertainment venue that quickly became popular and profitable. Initially a small disco bar, it eventually transformed into a full-fledged nightclub. In Malaga, the couple welcomed their 3rd child, and life seemed prosperous and stable. At 25, Irene's husband was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for trafficking illegal substances. Tragically, he lost his life in prison under mysterious circumstances. The responsibility of raising the children fell solely on Irene's shoulders. Remembering how her mother single-handedly raised 3 children, Irene was determined to persevere. She successfully managed her business, earned well, and had big plans for the future. Relationship with Farid Henassaris. Farid Henassaris, a native of Barranquilla, Colombia, was born in 1976. Growing up in a large, impoverished family, he was the youngest of his siblings. His parents separated in the early 90s when he was still a teenager. His older siblings were independent by then, and Farid stayed with his mother. In 2001, at 25, Farid, along with his elderly mother, moved to Spain in search of a better life. They settled in Malaga, where Farid took any job he could to support himself and his mother. In 2005, he started working as a waiter at a nightclub owned by Irene. Irene immediately noticed Farid's hard work and reliability. She was also attracted to him, and Farid in turn did his best to please her. At the time, Irene's husband was incarcerated, and she planned to file for divorce but couldn't before her husband's untimely demise. Irene and Farid's employer-employee relationship soon blossomed into romance. Farid wasn't deterred by Irene's 3 children from previous relationships, nor was Irene bothered by Farid's humble background as a waiter whose salary she paid. Within months of starting their relationship, the couple decided to move in together. They settled in Irene's spacious apartment, and soon after, Irene became pregnant with Farid's child. They went on to have 2 children together. It's unclear if they were officially married, but Irene kept her first husband's surname, while the children born with Farid carried the Henassaris surname. Imprisonment and infidelity. In 2009, Irene's past seemed to repeat itself. Like her first husband, Farid was arrested for distributing illegal substances and sent to prison. Once again, Irene was left alone, this time with 5 children. Farid was sentenced to 3 years, but served only 1.5, being released early for good behavior and cooperation with the investigation. However, soon after Farid's imprisonment, Irene found solace in the arms of another man and lived with him for those 1.5 years. Farid learned of her infidelity only after his release. Understandably furious, he threatened Irene and her lover and almost attacked the man, narrowly avoiding another legal issue. Eventually, they resolved the matter peacefully. Farid forgave Irene for the sake of their children, and they resumed living together as if there had been no imprisonment or infidelity. Irene's relatives were always skeptical about Farid. Her mother and uncle disapproved of their relationship, suspecting Farid was only interested in Irene's money. Also, Irene's older children from her first marriage never accepted Farid, while the youngest, whom Farid had raised since the child was 2, saw him as a father figure. Fateful trip to Colombia. In early 2011, Irene's husband, Farid, expressed the need to visit his homeland of Colombia due to his father's severe illness. Reportedly, Farid's estranged father was diagnosed with advanced cancer, and his sister in Barranquilla had informed him of the dire situation. Irene, who had long wished to visit Farid's homeland, decided to accompany him. She was eager to meet Farid's father, whom she had never met, and also experience the legendary Barranquilla Carnival, typically held in late February. Moreover, Irene, who hadn't taken a vacation for years due to her dedication to work and raising her 5 children, saw this trip as an opportunity for a much-needed break. The couple planned a 10-day trip across the ocean, with Irene's mother and younger sister agreeing to care for her children during this period. Despite her mother, Maria Lucas's attempts to dissuade her from the journey due to a bad premonition, Irene disregarded her concerns. At the same time, the family faced financial difficulties due to a seasonal downturn in their business. Despite this, Irene had personal savings of 3,000 euros in cash hidden at home. But on the eve of their trip, she discovered the money had mysteriously vanished, almost derailing their plans. Irene quickly borrowed the necessary funds from her uncle and close friends. She also booked their flight tickets and a hotel in the city center, thoroughly preparing for a journey that, tragically, would be her last. Mysterious murder. On February 27, 2011, the couple arrived in Colombia. The flight was uneventful, and they immediately checked into their hotel. Irene called home to reassure her mother. However, 2 days later, Farid informed Irene's eldest son, 14, of his mother's death. Initially, Farid claimed an accident, but it was soon revealed that Irene was murdered during a robbery at a Barranquilla entertainment venue. The case quickly became a major news story in Colombia. The narrative was that Irene, a Spanish tourist, was killed by robbers who fled the scene, triggering a citywide police manhunt. However, the circumstances of the robbery and murder seemed unusual and suspicious. The attackers did not appear to be trying to steal anything, but instead shot Irene in the heart and then fled in haste. Police and local media representatives quickly arrived on the scene. Despite the fact that Farid witnessed the shooting of his partner during an interview with journalists, he looked quite calm, not corresponding to the image of a grief-stricken widower. The Spanish embassy in Bogotá confirmed the murder, adding that Irene's remains will be repatriated after the necessary investigations. The exact events of the night of March 2nd have yet to be clarified by investigators. In the meantime, authorities are actively pursuing the attackers responsible for this senseless crime. Surveillance footage. The case of Irene Cortez's mysterious death seemed to gain clarity after reviewing surveillance footage from cameras installed at the location where the murder occurred. On March 1st, Irene and her partner, Farid Genasares, had planned to meet Farid's brother, his sister, and their spouses. The group of 6 enjoyed the carnival, walked around town, and then, at Farid's suggestion, went to a local bar for dinner and entertainment. By 1 a.m., Irene, Farid, and his relatives were the only customers at the bar, as surveillance footage clearly shows. Around 2 a.m., 2 young men sitting away from the group entered the bar. They did not order anything and did not look comfortable, which caught the attention of the bar manager because of their suspicious behavior. Moreover, their young appearance made the manager check whether they were of legal age. The young men refused to show their IDs and, when asked to leave, one of them pulled out a gun and aimed it at the manager. His accomplice produced a knife, but soon retreated out of the camera's view. The armed assailant pushed the manager aside and approached Irene's table, announcing a robbery and demanding mobile phones and cash. His knife-wielding partner reappeared, presumably to collect valuables while the gunman kept the group under threat. However, he didn't get a chance to act. Confronting Irene, the gunman ordered Farid to stand for a pocket search. As Irene reached for her purse, the assailant lunged at her with the sane hand holding the gun. A shot was fired as he grabbed the purse, striking Irene directly in the chest. She collapsed to the floor as the assailants fled without taking anything. Farid and his brother chased after them while his sister tried to stop Irene's bleeding and his brother's wife called for emergency services. Unfortunately, the culprits were too fast to catch. The men returned to the bar, attempting to aid Irene, but it was too late. Emergency responders arrived quickly, yet Irene succumbed to her injuries en route to the hospital, leaving behind a baffling case and a grieving family. The hunt for the perpetrators, arrest, and trial. In the wake of the robbery and homicide that took Irene Cortez's life, law enforcement mobilized all available resources. The city was teeming with tourists for the carnival, and ensuring their safety was paramount. A reward of 10 million pesos, about 3,500 euros, was announced for information leading to the culprits. The first suspect, the gunman Brian Dario, was apprehended the next day. He quickly implicated his accomplice, Juan Carlos. Juan, 18, surrendered to authorities, hoping for leniency. During interrogation, Dario claimed dire financial straits, debts, and a sick child in need of costly treatment drove him to the crime, corroborated later by his relatives. He maintained that Irene's shooting was accidental, occurring while trying to snatch her purse. Juan Carlos contended he was an unwitting participant. He said Brian didn't reveal his plans but asked for backup in a job. He claimed to have only a small knife for intimidation, not harm, and left the scene once he realized Brian's intentions. However, surveillance footage contradicted his claims, showing him returning to Brian. With both perpetrators in custody and their confessions, the case appeared solved, with prison sentences looming. The court found Dario guilty of robbery and homicide under aggravating circumstances, sentencing him to 23 years. Carlos received 17 years for complicity in these crimes. Accusations against Farid and new crime details. From the early stages of the investigation, the family of the deceased woman openly accused Farid of orchestrating the murder of his wife. Irene's mother and uncle hired a detective who conducted an independent investigation, gathering additional materials and evidence to hold the man accountable and prove his involvement in the crime. Starting with the earlier mentioned disappearance of €3,000 from the hiding place in Cortez's house. According to Maria Lucas, only Farid knew about this money, and he was the only one who could have discreetly taken it. The woman told her daughter about this from the beginning, but she did not want to listen. Now, she believed that her son-in-law used this money to pay Dario to kill his wife. Another weighty argument was the fabricated illness of the man's father, whom he was so eager to visit. It turned out that no cancer diagnosis was made for the elderly parent, and he was quite healthy for his age. Farid concocted this story, making it the main pretext for the trip to Colombia. Also, it was Genesaris who initiated the visit to that fateful establishment. Moreover, he insisted on continuing the feast deep into the night when all the other visitors had long dispersed, and their company was alone in the hall. Further, the detective conducted a detailed analysis of those very recordings from the cameras, giving an assessment of what was happening and making his own conclusions. He noticed that the criminals acted strangely. Juan was clearly scared and, most likely, really did not understand what was happening while Brian approached the company, came up to Farid and raised him, but did not directly threaten him with a gun. It looked like the men knew each other and acted cohesively. Then Farid, strangely, moved behind Irene, who was sitting at the table. When she reached into her bag to get her wallet, the criminal with the gun looked at the man as if waiting for a signal. It's hard to say exactly whether he received any kind of sign, as the victim and her husband were back to the camera. After the shot, the man chased the killer, but, in the expert's opinion, he deliberately let him escape. However, the latter statement can be considered controversial, as Brian was armed with a gun and Farid could reasonably fear for his life. Also in question was the man's behavior after his chosen one was declared dead. He willingly gave interviews to the arrived correspondents, talked about the details of what happened, and, at the same time, did not look too upset or depressed. Another important question: why, after the tragedy, did Genesaris call not Irene's mother, not her uncle, or any of the adult relatives, but dialed the number of her 14-year-old son to tell him about his mother's death? According to Maria Lucas, he wanted to personally inflict pain on the teenager, punishing him for not recognizing the stepfather's authority and treating him disrespectfully. The woman's uncle was the first to dare to give an interview in the press and openly talk about his suspicions and the results of the investigation. Pedro Lucas was sure that Farid planned the trip in advance, essentially luring Irene into a trap. The money stolen from her was used to pay for the services of a hired killer, and after her death, he planned to establish guardianship over the children and take over the business of his deceased wife. Farid's mother did not silently listen to her son being accused of a terrible crime and openly stood up for her offspring. The woman claimed that her offspring was madly in love with Irene and her children and would never harm her. However, in the end, the parent inadvertently let slip a phrase about the chosen one not having to cheat on Farid, as this greatly offended his pride. Also, an unpleasant detail emerged about Genesaris leaving Spain on fake documents, as he was not allowed to leave the country because he had recently been released from prison on parole. The man himself denied this information, stating that he left legally and Irene acted as his guarantor. Funeral. Without the widower. 12 days after the tragedy, Irene's body was returned to her native Spain. The funeral was conducted with a closed casket, as the remains had begun to decompose after such an extended period. Hundreds attended the funeral: family, friends, neighbors, and even those who didn't personally know Cortez, but had heard about the resonant story and wanted to express their condolences to the family. The only person missing from the farewell ceremony was Farid, who simply feared returning from Colombia, apprehensive of retribution. Farid claimed that the relatives of his late wife had repeatedly threatened him and his elderly mother. For this reason, before flying back to Spain, He intended to appeal to the authorities to ensure his safety. He sought a protective order to be able to attend the funeral, but his request was denied, and Genesarus decided not to take the risk. In turn, Farid filed a complaint in court against the relatives of his deceased wife, who, he alleged, hindered his return home. However, Maria and Pedro Lucas denied his claims, stating they were most interested in his return to face trial in Spain. Additional court proceedings. With new circumstances and accusations against Farid, an additional investigation and court proceedings were conducted. Dario and Carlos, already serving their sentences in a Colombian prison, were interrogated about their acquaintance with Genesarus and a possible premeditated conspiracy. However, Brian categorically denied this assumption. He continued to insist that the murder was an accidental result of a failed robbery attempt. He claimed he had never seen Farid before, let alone been hired as a hitman for his wife. The accusations indeed seemed to be grasping at straws, with no irrefutable evidence of premeditation or a contract killing, only assumptions and interpretations of the events on the recording. Dario also confessed that he was under the influence of alcohol and prohibited substances that evening, hence his poor recollection of the event's chronology. As for Carlos, he maintained that his friend did not involve him in his plans, and everything that happened in the bar was as shocking to him as it was to those they attacked. Blon appeared to be telling the truth, but Brian's words, who made the fatal shot, raised some doubts. Consider this. He failed to commit the robbery, ended up in prison, but his sick child still received the necessary expensive treatment. Brian claimed that kind-hearted people, learning about his motive, helped him. However, the Lucas family's lawyers tried to prove that the 3,000 euros stolen from Irene, which Farid paid for her murder, were spent on the treatment. Supposedly, Brian agreed to sacrifice himself and go to prison to save his child and secretly pass the money to his wife. This version, however, was never proven, returned to Spain. Only after obtaining a court order that guaranteed his safety did Genesarus decide to return to Spain. Several months had passed since the tragedy, and the media frenzy had subsided. Upon his return, Genesarus claimed to have brought investigation materials proving his innocence in his wife's murder. He cited his main reason for returning as a desire to care for the children he shared with Irene, who had been under the care of the deceased's relatives during his absence. 6 months later, Farid decided to give a major interview in which he revealed that he had lost virtually everything. He was jobless, his passport had been annulled, preventing him from leaving the country, and to add insult to injury, his friends had turned their backs on him, and the mother and uncle of his late wife forbade him from seeing his children. Genesarus repeatedly faced Maria and Pedro Lucas in court. He accused them of threatening him while they attempted to prove his involvement in Irene's murder. However, neither side could substantiate their claims. Ultimately, the children remained in the custody of their grandmother and uncle, and the widower was unable to claim any of his late wife's property. Jealousy is a terrible, often destructive force that can blind a person and push him to crime. It was jealousy that caused the tragedy that played out in Costa Rica a few years ago. This case went down in the history of forensics as the case of Gerardo Cruz. But let's talk about everything in order. Sodi Fonc was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. About her family and early years are known a little. The girl's childhood was in an area called Cuba, where she lived with her mother named Sonia Fonc. Sodi attended one of the local schools and even then demonstrated her difficult and conflicted character. She did not tolerate rejection, often achieved what she wanted by force or deception. According to the memories of local residents, Sodi, thanks to her striking appearance and perfect figure, easily charmed men, but could not keep them. Sodi was very beautiful and skillfully used her appearance, but because of greed and vanity, put material wealth and self-interest above all else, which simply discouraged cavaliers after a short relationship. In addition, she was incredibly jealous and aggressive. In her youth, Sodi Fonc, thanks to her doll-like appearance, worked for several years in the image of Barbie in one of the large bookstores of the company Universal. It was then that the girl received such a flattering nickname, firmly entrenched behind her for life. Soon after graduating from high school, Sodi had an affair with a successful journalist who worked on local television. The man's name was Osvaldo Fernando Baleri, and he was 16 years older than her. It was the longest and most serious relationship Sodi, but the chosen one never made her an offer. In 1996, the couple had a common son, Christopher, and a year later their daughter Christina was born. But because of constant scandals and attacks of jealousy Sodi, Baleri left the young woman. In 2012, 53-year-old Osvaldo died suddenly, and, as it soon turned out, he did not enter the former lover in his will. The young woman was not going to put up with it, and decided to take matters into her own hands. She went to the house of a former lover and actually seized it, changing the locks there so that relatives and heirs of the deceased could not get in. In addition, Sodi took some valuable items belonging to the deceased. The Baleri family members were quite outraged and immediately went to court to punish Sodi for the theft. The police forced the young woman to leave the house, but criminal proceedings against her were not initiated. Fonc had many other romances, in particular with Juan Miguel Angel Perez, from whom the woman gave birth to her third child, a daughter named Maria. According to some reports, this relationship was officially registered but ended in divorce after a few years, although other sources claim that Sodi was not married. At the same time, she gave her youngest daughter her lover's surname without his knowledge or consent. It is a curious fact that some lovers of Barbie mysteriously disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances, but for a long time, for some reason, no one paid attention to it. So, for example, one of Sodi's lovers went missing, and according to relatives, it happened soon after he decided to break up with an irascible and aggressive lady. The man to this day has not been found, and many are sure that Fonc is directly related to this case, but some irrefutable evidence of her guilt could not be found. Sodi's other former lover, whose name was Diaco, died tragically after breaking up with her. He was murdered, and everything looked like a failed robbery attempt, and the mysterious killers were never brought to justice. Again, everyone speculated about Sodi's involvement in the crime, but no hard evidence was found against her. However, her most famous victim was Gerardo Cruz. Cruz, a native of Costa Rica, he was born in December 1992 in the city of San Jose. His own father, the boy did not know, because he left the family before the birth of his son. His mother, Ana Patricia, soon married a man named Hermes Rodriguez, who adopted the baby and raised him as his own. And a few years later, Gerardo had a younger sister, Milena. Childhood and youth of the guy can be characterized as a calm and carefree period. He studied at an ordinary school, was fond of motorcycles, and early met his true love, a girl named Carol. At the age of 23 years, Gerardo, along with his chosen one and their common daughter, 4-year-old Genesis Cruz, settled in the house of his aunt and uncle in the metropolitan suburb of San Sebastian. The young father took a job at a local bakery to provide his family with everything they needed. The couple was quite happy, and soon they learned about the upcoming addition to their family for the second time. In the summer of 2015, Gerardo met Sodi, who periodically shopped at the bakery where he worked. At that time, the woman was already 40 years old, but she was still quite attractive, loved to wear frank outfits and flirt. It is worth noting that with age she began to have affairs with men who were much younger than herself, because the attention of young lovers probably flattered her. Despite the almost 20-year age difference in the presence of a family, Cruz quickly became infatuated with a beautiful woman and began to secretly meet with her. She herself began to visit the bakery almost every day to be able to see her young lover, which did not escape the attention of other employees. In addition, Sodi often appeared accompanied by her eldest daughter, Christina, who was 19 years old at the time. At first, Gerardo managed to masterfully combine family life and secret meetings with his mistress, and so that none of his women did not realize the existence of a rival. But soon Gerardo, as they call it, lost his guard. Obviously, he wanted to boast of his success with women, and he began to tell friends and colleagues about Sodi, about what she is a terrific mistress and spoils him with gifts. Rumors quickly reached his mother, who tried to reason with her son and convince him to leave his mistress. The affair lasted only a few months and broke off in October that same year, 2015, when Sodi found out that the lover had a pregnant wife and a young daughter. The woman was furious. She started calling and texting Carol, insulting her and threatening to kill Gerardo if he didn't belong to her alone. Gerardo managed to beg his wife's forgiveness and keep the family together. As for the former mistress, he did not take her threats seriously, believing that she would quickly cool down and find a new boyfriend. He did not even realize how insidious and vindictive Sodi would turn out to be. Just a few days after the breakup with Fonc, Cruz became an accidental witness to a blatant scene. As the young man was walking down a downtown street, he saw a certain older man trailing behind a young girl, holding his phone in such a way that the camera was positioned under her miniskirt. The guy was outraged. He also took out his phone and started filming what was happening, then stopped the girl and told her about everything, advising her to go to the police. Cruz then chased after the man, trying to capture his face on camera. He chased him for about 2 minutes, wondering loudly if he was having a good time taking pictures of the girl's underwear without their knowledge, until the man jumped into a cab and drove away. That same night, Gerardo posted the video he had made on his internet page, and in just one night, the video went viral as users quickly identified the elderly man as a former official, an employee of the Ministry of Finance named Luis Sulmano Delgado. Soon, the video was picked up and circulated by the media, and Gerardo himself became a national celebrity. The young man was interviewed almost daily for print publications. He was invited to television and radio programs. He talked about the incident he had witnessed, condemned the actions of the former official, and said that he had no regrets about his action and would do it again. At the same time, experienced lawyers hired by Sulmano Delgado began working against Gerardo, accusing him of wrongdoing. They claimed that the distribution of the videotape made by the guy violated the law and were preparing a lawsuit against him in court. Cruz himself was quite surprised by this turn of events and did not understand why they can judge him, and not the man who committed such a disgusting act against an innocent girl. Gerardo gave his last interview on October 7th on the air of one of the local radio stations. He was sure that he was right and believed that he had nothing to fear. The next day, Gerardo had arranged to meet with his friend Oswald after work, but he abruptly canceled the meeting, citing a sudden emergency. As it later became known, that day, he received a message from Sodi, in which a young woman tricked him into coming to the park in the evening, where he was supposed to be interviewed again. Gerardo didn't even suspect anything wrong and simply believed his former lover. After the end of his shift, he went to the agreed place, but there were not journalists waiting for him, but 2 unknown men who took away his bag, beat him and stabbed him several times in the chest and stomach, and then fled. The injured man, before losing consciousness, managed to call his friend and report what had happened, and the latter immediately called the police and medics. Thanks to his prompt action, Gerardo was taken to hospital, where doctors fought for his life for 42 days. During this time, Gerardo underwent dozens of operations, but alas, to save him failed. On November 19th, Cruz died in the intensive care unit. Since shortly before the tragedy, he became a real celebrity. His condition, without exaggeration, followed the whole country. Gerardo's relatives periodically gave interviews in which they asked all concerned to pray for his recovery. They themselves did not understand who and why could do such a thing to Gerardo. At the funeral of the guy came a lot of people who wanted to express their condolences to his family. Also, everyone expressed hope that the police will quickly get on the trail of the killers and they will be fairly punished. Initially, there were several versions of the crime. The first was that it was a robbery murder. Indeed, Gerardo was attacked in the park in the evening. His bag was taken away and he was stabbed with a knife so that it looked like a common thief. However, just a few days before, Cruz had released a sensational video compromising a nationally known former official. Hence the second theory, a revenge killing. The media openly said and wrote that Sulmano Delgado could well have hired hitmen to remove the young man who had spoiled his reputation. The murder was hotly debated in the press, and people picketed the streets demanding that the killers be found and jailed. The police began to put forward and consider different versions, as well as to look for other possible enemies and ill-wishers of Gerardo. For several months, The investigation stood still until in May 2016, a video from a street surveillance camera was discovered. The footage shows two men running away from the scene where Cruz was fatally shot. These men immediately became prime suspects, but it was up to the police to identify and track them down. The tape turned out to be a key piece of evidence, and once it was made public, the case moved forward. It was repeatedly played on news programs, asking viewers to look closely, because these could be dangerous criminals. In addition, the police were able to draw up rough sketches of the wanted men and describe their anthropometric data. Soon the identity of one of the men was established because he himself decided to surrender to the police and cooperate with the investigation in the hope that it will help him to mitigate the sentence. Thanks to the information he provided, the investigation quickly came to several other accomplices, as well as the organizers of the crime, Somadi and her daughter Christina. Soon all participants in the crime were taken into custody. In addition to the mother and daughter, several other men were arrested. Cab driver Ronald Archie, who found the perpetrators of the murder, laborer Cesar Chavez, who acted as an intermediary, and a young minor who was directly involved in the attack. Omar Costa, who had been following the victim and reporting his whereabouts on the day of the attack, was also later arrested. The roles and connections of all the participants in the crime were established through phone calls and text messages. The murder was ordered by Somodi, who had planned the whole thing carefully, including her daughter Christina in the details of the plan. Together, they turned to their friends Ronald and Caesar to help them find a couple of hitmen to kill Gerardo and make it look like a robbery gone wrong in a night park. They were later joined by Omar, who had to make sure the victim went to the agreed-upon location. Somodi chose the date of the massacre herself, October 7th. On that day, she repeatedly contacted all the participants in the crime, assigned roles, and made sure that everyone followed the plan. In addition, the young woman demanded that after committing the crime to bring her something of the former lover's belongings as evidence. Cruz, after working his shift, headed straight for the park. He was sure that he was going for an interview, so he tried not to be late for the meeting. But at the agreed place, he was attacked, stabbed several times, and then took his bag and jacket, which were given to the customer as evidence. The main evidence of Somodi's guilt were the text messages in which the murder plan and the roles of each of the participants were described in detail. The woman was so confident in her impunity that she did not even bother to delete them. The motive for committing such a grave crime was banal jealousy. The woman did not want to share a lover with his wife, and decided that if he was not with her, then no one would get it. She thought everything through and involved in her criminal plan her own daughter, who helped her in everything. Mother and daughter were immediately taken into custody, and the fact that to release them on bail was out of the question, because the criminals would probably make an attempt to escape and leave the country. Their accomplices also ended up in pre-trial detention, except for Omar, who was in charge of surveillance, and the youngest participant in the crime was handed over to authorities specializing in juvenile delinquency. The investigation lasted about a year and a half, and only in December 2017, the trial of all participants in the criminal conspiracy began. In addition, it turned out that Somodi had previously been brought to criminal responsibility several times. In particular, she was arrested for forging documents to receive state payments, but then she got off with only a fine. In addition, the story of Miguel Angel Perez, the father of Somodi's youngest daughter, has surfaced. As it turned out, the young woman gave the child's surname of a former lover without his consent, and then through the court obtained from him the payment of alimony which she received more than 3 years. When it turned out that the whole procedure was falsified, the swindler was sentenced to 3 years in prison and a large fine. But the court took into account the fact that she had a small child and commuted the sentence to a suspended 5-year sentence. At the trial, the wife of the murdered Gerardo admitted that she knew about his affair with Somodi and that the former mistress had threatened him with death, but he did not pay much attention to the threats. The main motive of the crime, as already mentioned, was jealousy and wounded pride of the woman, who could not accept the fact that her young lover preferred to stay with his wife. Thanks to the records of phone calls, it was found out that the mother and daughter planned the crime together, It also became known that after the release of the very CCTV footage that captured the killers, Christine had a nervous breakdown. She called her mother, sobbing, and was on the verge of going to the police to confess, but she calmed her daughter, assuring that the investigation will never come out on them. The verdict was not announced until January 23, 2018. According to the court decision, Sodi was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Her daughter, as well as Ronald and Caesar, received 25 years in prison each. One of the killers went to a juvenile detention center, and the second was not found at that time. Omar, on the other hand, who had been following the victim, was acquitted. The family of the victim received $140,000 as moral compensation. After the announcement of the verdict, the relatives expressed gratitude to the court for the fair punishment for the killers of Gerardo. However, it soon became known that the lawyers of Sodi and Christina appealed to the appeals court to mitigate the sentences. The new trial took place in November 2019. At the same time, the identity of the second killer became known, who, according to Ronald, took part in the massacre but was not privy to the details of the plan. Ronald and Caesar also appealed to the appeals court, hoping to reduce the sentence. As a result, the sentence for each of the participants in the crime was reduced by 5 years. Now, Sodi is serving his 25-year sentence in one of the women's prisons in Costa Rica. As it became known in the summer of 2020, she registered a marriage with a woman with whom she met in prison. Her chosen name is Lindsay Diaz Lopez, and at the time of registration of the relationship, the one has already managed to leave the prison walls, released on parole, while Sodi will spend almost 2 decades behind bars. The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with the bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place of the planet as New Zealand can happen such bloody tragedies. After all, New Zealand is first of all a picturesque nature with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Oakland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Carmen and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987 in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, Carmen completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Carmen was a loyal friend and comrade for many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in the store as a marketer, and in her spare time she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her strange choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary and even more so undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients. It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callahan. Bradford James Joseph Callahan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly, and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant, and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and the measured course of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Carmen and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years they parted, but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to keep a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and wanting to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as she could. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009 he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services in the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he in turn simply ignored the requests of the former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly reflected on the alimony, which he paid under the agreement Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The police officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. The relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party in the bayonet and with aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a number of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement to pay child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Tarmas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman from video camera images and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink and shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash can and an overturned fabric horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands, and upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help, and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was found luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase on some of the things were found traces of blood. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment was an envelope with Misty's name on it and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding traces of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Auckland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing, but the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, they discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not found connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house, and that a neighbor had seen through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? The police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining his bank card details and traced his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callahan, a meat cleaver, and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events that did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list. It turned out that on one workday, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around the property for a long time. It was strange, but not so strange that the workers who saw him would start reporting anyone about such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callahan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callahan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to change the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and is scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. Brad thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he threw several punches again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment, and that he would not be able to get back everything that was, but it did not upset him at all, because by such an act he had solved his main problem, and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callahan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside the supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went back into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Okahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body, but an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Carmen Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, a private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Wenning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Wenning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was newly charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callahan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callahan dismembered Miss Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Auckland when Bradford Callahan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callahan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal, but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Wenning sentenced Brad Callahan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callahan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences are to be served concurrently. Judge Wenning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callahan to justice. Mr. Callahan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on 2 families, said Detective Inspector Marc Benefield. Callahan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Marc Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Marc Benefield, during the interview, explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, we have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court, said Marc Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callahan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did, for the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. We will never forgive him for what he did to our family, said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers, added her stepfather Wayne. Callahan's attorney, Stuart Grieve, said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing, we are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and uncontrollable anger, a person can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callahan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out because it wasn't his fault. Absurd. The city of Welcome in the Free State Province is the youngest and most dynamically developing city in South Africa. It was founded in 1947, following the discovery of the largest gold deposit in the area the previous year. Its name translates from Afrikaans, one of the country's official languages, as greeting. Despite its welcoming name and its industry-forming gold mining, it gained widespread attention due to a grievous crime that occurred there in 2011. When the criminals were identified, the prosecution was baffled. This notorious case became the 10th in the history of international criminal activity. During the investigation, it was discovered that the case involved followers of Satanism and occultism. Michael Vanek was born on August 14, 1987, in the young and developing city for gold miners. He became the only brother to 4 sisters, Natasha, Michelle, Bianca, and Hendriana. The boy grew up in a large and close-knit family. His parents were caring and loving people. To provide a decent life for their children, the head of the family worked hard and organized his own business. The mother created a favorable atmosphere in the home for the growth and development of the younger generation. Michael was sociable and kind, showed diligence in school and sports. He even earned a black belt in karate, which he was very proud of. This gave him confidence and resilience. After finishing school, the young man trained as an electrician. This in-demand profession opened the doors to good earnings and promising work. The young man worked in his field at mine number 4 of the Beatrix mine in the small town of Unison. He did not stop there and continued his education to become an engineer. In 2011, the 23-year-old hero of our story registered on a dating site. In this way, he wanted to distract himself from a breakup and make new acquaintances. It seemed that luck smiled at him one day. Among the numerous photos and profiles, a lonely young man took a fancy to the profile of a sweet and smiling girl. During the ensuing correspondence, the guy learned that their interests coincided. She, like him, disliked noisy parties and drunk companies and wanted to find true love and build a strong family. Michael was pleasantly surprised that he could find a suitable candidate on the internet. Since the young man still lived with his parents, he shared his joys and concerns with his mother. On April 2nd, the son boasted to her that he was going on a date, and he prepared thoroughly for it. To please the girl, he withdrew his first paycheck of 1,000 rand from his card. The only thing that troubled the young man was the unusual place his friend chose for their first meeting. It was the city cemetery. Apparently not to worry his parents, he kept quiet about it. Around 9 p.m. that same day, Michael said goodbye to his family and left the house. He headed to the designated place in the silver Peugeot 207, a gift from his parents for his coming of age. As tradition demanded, the girl was a little late, but her appearance was impressive. The stranger from the internet arrived in a pristine white dress and smiled. The conversation was relaxed, after which she suggested continuing the evening further and invited the young man to a distant part of the cemetery. There, a meadow awaited them with a spread blanket. On it lay a basket of fruits and wine. After the young people had a glass each, the beautiful companion kissed a stunned Michael. Suddenly, the pleasant feeling of the kiss turned to pain and horror. The unsuspecting young man became part of a sinister plan, since the innocent appearance of his pen pal did not match her inner world. Chama Van Heerden was born in 1991 during a crisis period for her parents. When her mother found out she was pregnant, the couple decided to delay their divorce and give their relationship another chance. However, their attempts to reconcile and improve their life together were unsuccessful. The family environment only worsened. Her mother openly disliked the little girl, seeing her as a tie to her husband. After the divorce, she took the children and moved away from her former husband. However, the failed marriage was not the main reason for her coldness. She continued to lack love and attention towards her children, even after the relationship ended. All 3 children felt lonely and misunderstood, but Chana suffered the most. She grew up withdrawn and sullen. From an early age, she exhibited psychological issues. She talked about death and drew incomprehensible pictures. Eventually, the little girl developed an imaginary friend named Azazel. Concerned about their daughter's behavior, her grandparents thought she was possessed. Thus, they decided to take her to church, where she underwent an exorcism ritual. According to a witness, her body convulsed during the prayers. In reality, Chana was scared of crowds and clearly frightened by the ordeal. The shock could have triggered an epileptic seizure. The traumatic event deeply impacted the young girl's memory, causing her to develop a fear of the dark. Additionally, her mother once told her that toys come to life at night, which led the frightened daughter to tape her doll's eyes shut and tie their bodies with shoelaces. As she grew older, her mental condition worsened. At age 10, she nearly harmed a house guest with a knife while visiting her father. Only after this incident did they seek psychiatric help for Chana. Following a specialist's evaluation, she was prescribed sedatives. The medication had a positive effect on her mood and well-being. She became calmer and more friendly. During a remission period, her father spent more time with his daughter. He often picked her up from school and took her hunting with him. By sharing his hobby, he aimed to give her the attention she lacked. The unstable teenager enjoyed her father's activity. She later confessed that she found pleasure in butchering carcasses and skinning animals. This led her to bring home dead animals, starting with rats and birds and eventually progressing to cats and dogs. She enjoyed cutting flesh and occasionally inflicted injuries on herself. During an investigation, her sister revealed that at age 12, Chana befriended an older man who introduced her to forbidden substances and took advantage of her condition. Her sisters did not inform their parents, but Chana ended the destructive relationship. This experience undoubtedly had a negative impact on her troubled psyche. At age 15, her mother moved to New Zealand, where she met another man and stayed with him. Over time, she never returned for her children. They remained with their father and stepmother, who tried their best to provide for the children, though they did not fully understand the severity of the youngest daughter's issues. Her behavior was largely attributed to adolescence. The situation worsened a year later, when Chana became involved with a 22-year-old young man interested in Satanism, occultism, and voodoo cults. The boyfriend became a real mentor to the impressionable young woman, but he was cruel in character, often suppressing and demeaning her. Nonetheless, a supportive family environment and psychotherapy yielded positive results. By her 17th birthday, Chana's life began to improve. She broke off dangerous connections, graduated from high school, and enrolled in college where she studied art and graphic design. After Chana lost interest in Satanism and stopped using forbidden substances, her emotional state improved. She excelled in her studies and secured a job in her field. At her new job, Chana found support not only from her colleagues, but also from management. It turned out she had a real talent for visual arts, which brought her respect and recognition in her professional field. At the same time, she started dating a man named Warren. To outsiders, her life appeared completely normal. Her family and close friends did not discuss her past, hoping that the difficult times were behind her. However, what was happening in her soul was hard to say. Perhaps her inner demons were merely lying dormant. Her father was the happiest for Chana. He hoped that she had finally matured and would soon marry. However, his expectations were not met. The obstacle emerged from an unexpected source. Warren had a friend named Roy who considered himself highly sensitive. Despite Chana's sweet and friendly demeanor, he sensed something repellent and malevolent in her. Yet Roy's words were not taken seriously, as her outward appearance did not match his perceptions. One day, he pulled her aside and asked, "Who is Norman?" Each time he saw her, this name popped into the clairvoyant's mind. The young man thought she might not be faithful to his friend, so he decided to ask her directly. In response, Chana unexpectedly spat in his face and demanded he stop bothering her with foolish questions. It later became known that Norman was the second name of Azazel, her imaginary childhood friend. Following the incident, the dynamics between the young people changed. At one of the parties, Chana's attention shifted to a 24-year-old named Martins. Although the young man was generally calm and sociable, there were unpleasant rumors about him. Martins van der Merwe. Martins van der Merwe was born into a well-off and respected family. Unlike Chana, he had excellent relationships with both parents. As a child, he was smart and well-mannered, performing well academically. However, it turned out that since the age of 6, he had been suffering from a mental illness. Around that time, he began experiencing hallucinations. His parents recounted that according to their son, a certain entity appeared to him, convincing the boy that he was endowed with incredible strength. Martins believed this and felt special. Gradually, his mental condition worsened, and his behavior changed. Due to problems at school and home, at the age of 14, van der Merwe was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility. There, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Unfortunately, conventional treatment did not help. Since the family was financially secure, his parents dedicated all their efforts to finding effective medications. Thanks to the efforts of both family and doctors, the necessary drugs were eventually found. With these, nearly all deviations were controlled, except for sporadic outbursts of aggression. Martins once witnessed a stray cat being mauled by dogs. It made a deep impression on him. Instead of feeling disgust or pity, he hid the animal's body and watched it. This led him to start torturing animals. He later dropped out of school and began helping his father in the carpentry shop. In the future, Martins dreamed of continuing the family tradition. While working, his condition improved. He no longer wanted to do bad things to animals and take their lives. For this reason, he stopped taking medication. Everyone was wary of his decision, but the young man insisted that the disease had receded and that he was in control. Unfortunately, this turned out to be an inevitable mistake: general insanity. His mental state gradually deteriorated. It was around this time that Martins met Chana. These unstable young people found each other and began dating. However, outwardly they looked happy, so their parents were happy with their relationship. Of course, neither of them admitted to the problems their children had faced in the past. In the end, their union led to horrifying consequences. At first, the couple was open to the outside world, socializing and attending parties. Acquaintances recalled that they sometimes noticed cuts on the hands of young people. They joked that they were engaged in intimate experiments. After that, they began to distance themselves from people. They became interested in Satanism, voodoo cults, and occult practices. They also became interested in infamous serial criminals. In February 2011, Martins posted a picture with Chana on one of his social media pages. The pair were hugging, and the caption under the photo read, "Killers," with an ambiguous emoji. At the time, no one took their post seriously. Eventually, the young man asked his girlfriend's father for a marriage license. Mr. Van Heerden was incredibly happy. No one could have imagined what terrible dreams the couple nurtured. Instead of dreaming of traveling and children, they wanted to end their lives. Gradually, their sick fantasies turned into a bloodthirsty plan. The crazy couple decided to torture the homeless to death, and they practiced on animals. However, their plan was never realized, as the criminals could not find a suitable victim. Their monstrous plan was waiting for the right moment. The encounter. It all began when Chana posted her profile on a dating site. Before long, a young man named Michael Vanek responded. The attractive young man caught the interest of the nefarious couple, and Chana targeted him for their plans. From the very first messages, the young people started flirting. After a few days of communication, the girl suggested they meet. Michael had been looking forward to this, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon or directly from her. Unfortunately, the somewhat unusual location for their first date didn't raise any alarms for him. Apparently, he was so eager to meet the charming conversationalist from the internet in person that he agreed to the dubious proposal. Chana and Martins meticulously prepared to bring their wild dream to life. They thought through everything thoroughly: the attire, the means to end a life. and even the setting. Chana approached the date fully prepared. The trap. The long-awaited meeting went exactly as planned for both parties. The victim fell for the bait. An angelic appearance of the girl and a kiss lulled his alertness. This gesture was the agreed-upon signal for Martins. All this time, the man had been hiding behind the tombstones. He approached Michael from behind and struck him with a knife. Unexpectedly for everyone, the young man resisted. The attackers hadn't anticipated this. Noticing that their new acquaintance was putting up a desperate fight, Chana intervened. Altogether, they inflicted about 30 knife wounds on the unfortunate young man. Ultimately, completely weakened, Michael begged them to end his suffering. Pleased with their conquest, Martin slit his throat. After that, the unthinkable began. The perpetrators dragged the body onto the blanket and proceeded with their plan. The couple severed the young man's right and left legs at the knee and decapitated him. The severed parts were placed in bags. They then decided to hide the body at the site. However, they miscalculated one thing. They had no shovels. Thus, they had to dig the earth with their hands and knives. As a result, they could not make the grave deep enough. After burying the body halfway, the perpetrators left with their trophies. Along the way, they used the victim's vehicle. Martins initially took the wheel, but later handed control over to his companion. The surge of adrenaline prevented him from keeping his eyes on the road. Upon arriving home, they stored the bags with body parts in the refrigerator as if they were groceries. After Van der Merwe had somewhat recovered, he started Michael's car and drove it to a troubled neighborhood. The criminals hoped the car would be stolen, so he left it unlocked with the keys in the ignition. The victim. The next day, a cemetery worker noticed a fresh burial that wasn't there the day before. His dreadful suspicions were confirmed when he stumbled upon bloody traces and torn clothing in the bushes. He then called over his supervisor to examine the grave. What the unintended witnesses found would long remain etched in their memory. Beneath the soil lay a dismembered male body. The authorities were immediately notified of the grim discovery. At the same time, Michael's parents were beside themselves with worry. Since the previous evening, he hadn't responded to calls. Even if it was presumed that he had stayed overnight at his internet girlfriend's place, he should have made contact by now. Instead, Michael's workplace called his parents. The concerned management wanted to understand why he was absent from a crucial site. At the same time, the police received a report about a Peugeot 207 found abandoned in a parking lot. Passers-by were alarmed by the blood stains on the trunk. After running the vehicle through their database, the owner was identified. Detectives also tracked that before its discovery, the car had been at the cemetery for a long time. The local precinct was already aware of an unidentified body found on its grounds. All signs were suspicious. Armed with this information, law enforcement officials went to the residence of Michael Vanek. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed their suspicions. His parents had been searching for the young man since the previous day. They asked Michael's mother to come to the cemetery, where forensic specialists and search dogs were already at work, desperately trying to locate missing body parts. At the scene, the woman recognized belongings found, and she also identified her son's body by distinctive burn marks he had sustained in childhood. During the autopsy, the medical examination confirmed that the young man had suffered numerous knife wounds. Signs of his struggle were evident. It was also determined that the body had been dismembered post-mortem. At least the perpetrators had the mercy not to do this while he was still alive. Meanwhile, experts noted that the dismemberment was performed with professional precision, indicating that the perpetrators had significant experience in this area. There was no doubt that multiple attackers were involved. The number of wounds, their nature, and the strength required to subdue the victim clearly demonstrated this. Ultimately, DNA testing confirmed the identity of 23-year-old Michael Vanek. Time to gather stones. During the investigation, police confiscated the victim's cell phone and computer. It was established that the last person the young man had communicated with was Chana van Heerden. According to their messages, she was the one who invited him to the ominous date at the cemetery. Subsequently, detectives contacted the potential suspect and invited her to give a statement. The young woman did not refuse and arrived with her boyfriend, Martins van der Merwe. The couple was interviewed separately. During the questioning, they confessed to being involved in the group ending of a life. Upon learning of the incident, the girl's father rushed to the station. He couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked his daughter if she really was involved in the accusations against her. Chana calmly confirmed and added that she would willingly do it again. She claimed she had dreamt of this ever since she started hunting with him. The cruel confession of the seemingly sweet girl shocked not only her father but everyone present. Her boyfriend Martins also behaved defiantly. As the case gained public attention, he did not hide his pleasure from the public's scrutiny and posed for the cameras. It was clear that none of the accused felt remorse for their actions. It turned out that after the crime, if caught, the mad couple planned to end their lives. But the young man changed his mind, and his partner followed suit. They wanted to live, the lair of monsters. During the search of the young couple's apartment, police felt uneasy, to say the least. The environment was horrifying. The walls were adorned with portraits of Chana, depicting her in various guises. In some, she was depicted without eyes, in others without a mouth or ears. All images of the girl were distorted. Additionally, the rooms contained ritual items, animal scalps, knives, and various objects of unclear purpose. Also found were belongings of the deceased young man, glasses, and a wallet. As Martins later confessed, they took Michael's money to buy necessary items for their next crime. However, the most horrifying discovery awaited in the refrigerator. From it, police retrieved Michael's head with the mouth sewn shut. It was assumed that the couple planned to use the young man's head as a ritual bowl later on. Eyes and ears of the victim were stored in separate containers. The victim's hand and leg were found buried near the murderer's home, alongside the bodies of various animals. The girl's diary contained horrific thoughts and their impending realization. From everything discovered during the inspection, it was clear that the couple planned not just one more crime. The process of ending lives and subsequent mutilation of bodies provided them with unimaginable pleasure. Martins and Chana underwent multiple evaluations for mental competence. Fortunately, the commission confirmed that the young individuals were aware of their actions and desired the inevitable consequences. Otherwise, they might have avoided punishment and received only mandatory treatment. Punishment. In November 2011, the trial concerning Chana took place, treating her as a serial offender. Despite this being a singular incident, she did not hide her desire to repeat her actions. She told the court that she understands she should feel shame or remorse, but for some reason, she does not. She can only grasp the gravity of her actions through societal standards and the reactions of others. Psychiatrists declared that the defendant suffers from psychopathic and antisocial disorders, apparently more dangerous than her boyfriend, but adept at concealing it. Throughout the sentencing, she remained impassive. Chana Van Heerden was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole, 20 years for ending a life and an additional 15 for robbery and dismemberment. As for Martins van der Merwe, unlike his partner, he defended himself in court. He claimed not to remember the events that occurred until he found himself in jail and behaved arrogantly and aggressively. The defendant admitted to studying Satanism and occultism, trying to understand life and death. He said his relationship with Chana pushed them both towards committing the crime. During the trial, he apologized to the victim's parents, although his words sounded insincere. He implied that the victim was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, although in reality, the mad couple had lured the unfortunate man into a premeditated trap. Michael's mother could not contain her distress and struck the accused during one of the sessions. Ultimately, Martins van der Merwe was also found guilty of the charges against him and sentenced to 35 years in prison, but with a chance for parole after serving half of his sentence. Life after. Until 2014, the lovers kept in touch behind bars. In his letters, Martins called Chana a dark goddess, writing, "Lady Blackmore, when you part your lips, words of a dead butterfly spell out. They fall upon my mystical heart and paint it with sweet poison, spreading beautiful darkness through my empty veins." Over time, Chana ended the relationship with her former lover, feeling that they had grown cold and distant from each other. It is known that in prison the woman behaves exemplarily, teaching her fellow inmates art and theology. Collectors fascinated by the lives of humanity's worst, maniacs, offenders, cannibals, have paid large sums for a photograph of the woman with her autograph, as well as a print of her hand. Remarkably, Martins also developed his own fan club. For a long time, police monitored his followers to prevent them from emulating his actions. The convicted man continued treatment and completed his education through correspondence courses. Thus, a good-natured young man became the victim of a terrible scheme by two mentally unstable individuals. Driven by their own desires, lacking restraining mechanisms and societal norms, the perpetrators decided they had the right to take another person's life. Yet what is also monstrous in this story is how many troubled individuals there are among us. Sometimes behind an innocent facade lies sheer hell. New acquaintances do not always positively affect our lives. Sometimes they can mark a point of no return.
According to statistics, approximately 30% of violent crimes committed around the world remain unsolved, despite the rapid development of technology and techniques, as well as the creation of extensive DNA databases. As a rule, most of these crimes are solved on hot tracks, but there are cases when the investigation lasts for years or even decades before the perpetrator is punished. But the Ellen Ray Greenberg case, which we will look at in this video, is interesting in that for many years of investigation, it has hardly moved forward. The case has been investigated with numerous irregularities, and over time, there are more questions than answers. The brutal murder of a young woman to this day remains a mystery, and what is remarkable is that the investigation is trying hard to prove that the cheerful Ellen, who was enthusiastically preparing for her own wedding, suddenly decided to leave her life. But let's try to understand everything in order. Who is Ellen Ray Greenberg? Ellen was born in New York in June 1993 in the family of Chana and George Greenberg. She was the only child of her parents, growing up in love and care. During high school, the girl was actively engaged in team sports and even gave hope as a promising athlete. She was an active, restless, and sociable child, but at the same time studied well, showing a special interest in the humanities. After graduating from high school, Ellen became a student at Pennsylvania State University, where she received a degree in public relations. But having started working on a specialty, Greenberg realized that this is not what she would like to devote her life to. Parallel to work, the girl enrolled in the correspondence department of the Pedagogical Institute. A few years later, she brilliantly defended her diploma and moved to Philadelphia, where she was hired to work in one of the local schools as a junior high school teacher. According to relatives, Ellen's life was going great. She was full of enthusiasm, made big plans for the future, and simply adored her work and small students. At the same time, Ellen met a boy with whom she had a torrid affair, and soon they began to prepare for their wedding. The girl's favorite was a young man named Samuel, or just Sam, Goldberg. He was from a fairly wealthy and well-known family in the city. His parents owned their own large business, and his uncle had a reputation as one of the best lawyers in the state. The young men met in 2009 at a party, thanks to their mutual acquaintances, and immediately liked each other. The friendly interaction quickly turned into a rapidly developing romantic relationship, and soon they decided to move in together and live together. On the eve of 2011, Sam made his beloved a proposal, which was the best gift for the new year. He gave her a beautiful diamond ring, and the couple began to prepare for the upcoming wedding, which was scheduled for the spring of the same year. Family members of both young people took the news with joy, and it seemed that the happiness of lovers can no longer interfere with anything. Ellen plunged headlong into the pleasant troubles associated with the wedding, making lists of guests and sending them invitations, choosing a venue and elements of decor for the event, trying on wedding dresses, trying to create their ideal image, and planning a honeymoon. It is noteworthy that almost all these issues the bride was engaged in independently, and the groom did not visibly participate in the process. But loved ones did not attach much importance to this, and Helen never complained. True, there were some oddities, to which everyone paid attention only after the tragedy occurred. In January 2011, the weather in the city was very snowy and frosty. On the 26th, Ellen went to work at school as usual. But close to noon, there was a strong wind and a blizzard, so classes were canceled and students and teachers were sent home. Ellen returned to the apartment she and Sam shared. It was in a cozy apartment complex located in one of the quiet areas of the city. Soon Sam returned home as well. According to some reports, the couple that day quarreled, which was mentioned in passing, and Sam himself, but later he began to deny it. Close to 5 p.m., Sam decided to go to the gym located in the same apartment complex. He was gone for less than 1 hour, but when he returned, he could not get into the apartment because the door was locked from the inside. Sam first knocked loudly and insistently, then began calling his fiancée by name, which attracted the attention of neighbors, and then began calling her on the phone and sending messages. No one responded to his yelling, knocking, and calling, but it was heard that the phone was inside the apartment. Sam then went to the first floor of the building to the security guard to ask for help. Samuel explained the situation to him and asked if it was possible to open the front door, to which the guard replied that this was beyond his authority and that he could not leave his post by instruction. Then Sam went back up to his floor and decided to act on his own. He slammed his shoulder into the door, and the first time he did it, he managed to break the latch. It was quiet inside, Ellen's call was never answered, and when he entered the kitchen, he saw a gruesome sight. His fiancée was sitting on the floor, leaning back against the cabinet door, her body slashed with a knife and her clothes stained with blood. Sam immediately started calling emergency services, describing the situation, and when asked to check if the girl had a pulse, he acted strangely, asking several times if he really needed to do that. Then there was silence, and afterward Sam suddenly stated that there was a knife sticking out in his fiancée's chest, which, allegedly, he had not noticed before.
He also added that Ellen was obviously already dead. The police officers who arrived on the call were quite surprised and noted that they had never seen such a thing in their many years of practice. The door was indeed locked from the inside with a latch, which Sam had subsequently knocked off with his shoulder. There were no signs of forced entry or the presence of intruders in the room. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment. All valuables and money were still there. Nothing had been searched or touched. But the most interesting thing began when the body of the dead girl was examined. No signs of struggle or attempts to defend herself were found, as if everything happened suddenly and the victim simply did not have time to react. On her body counted about 24 stab wounds of varying depth, and the final blow came to the heart, and it took Ellen's life. We will return to the blatant negligence with which the crime scene and the body of the deceased were examined a little later. This negligence allowed a lot of evidence to be missed and left a possible perpetrator at large. But even more strange was the behavior of the police, who even before the medical examination thought that Ellen had done this to herself: panic attacks, visits to a psychologist, and prescription drugs. In favor of the version of voluntary departure from life was the fact that Ellen, since some time, began to suffer from anxiety disorder and panic attacks arising on its background. The situation was so serious that Ellen even sought help from a psychologist. Close, she tried not to complain, so as not to worry them, and relatives in turn associated changes in Ellen's behavior with stress and excitement before the wedding. However, the specialist who worked with Ellen prescribed her 2 medications, which she took regularly to combat her anxiety. As the psychologist himself would later report, neither of these drugs, neither together nor separately, could in any way aggravate Ellen's mental state and cause thoughts of death. The specialist also noted that despite her anxiety, the patient never had such thoughts. In addition, Ellen's friends and colleagues noticed that after she and Sam started living together, her behavior began to change. In addition to becoming anxious and restless, Ellen almost stopped making any decisions on her own. In every situation, Ellen would say that she needed to discuss it with her fiancé, that she couldn't give an answer without consulting him. Similar oddities noticed, and parents of the deceased, but every time her daughter tried to complain to them about her difficult emotional state, she added that Sam had nothing to do with it. And 3 weeks before the tragedy, Ellen told her mother that she wanted to quit school, drop everything, and return to her parents' house. Her mother was very surprised at her daughter's words, but assured her that she could return home at any time, and her parents would accept her without question. However, Ellen never brought up the subject again. Later, it was hypothesized that after the couple moved in together, Sam began to show violence towards his fiancée, and she was scared, afraid to tell anyone about it. The psychologist Ellen consulted did not confirm or deny this version, but noted that Ellen had difficulty articulating and expressing what she was experiencing and what was bothering her. It was as if she wanted to share something important, but the fear was stronger than that.
oddities and inconsistencies in the case. This unusual case from the very beginning raised a lot of questions, but most interestingly, no one even tried to find answers to them. The carelessness with which the examination of the crime scene and the body was conducted, as well as the expertise, is simply astounding. Many circumstances, facts, and evidence were simply ignored and irretrievably lost, and without them it was impossible to restore the full picture of the incident. To begin with, on the hands of the victim, was not found typical for self-defense injuries, which means that the girl was not trying to defend herself. But at the same time, on her body revealed numerous hematomas, which, judging by the degree of healing she received several weeks ago. The fiancé explained that these are most likely the consequences from playing team sports. However, Ellen's parents assured that their daughter had not visited gyms and playgrounds for a very long time because of the workload at work, as well as active preparations for the wedding. No suicide message was found. Ellen looked like a victim of a brutal massacre, but despite this, almost immediately a version of voluntary departure from life was voiced. Moreover, there were food, spices, and a cutting board on the table in the kitchen. So, according to the logic of the investigators, Ellen started to cook dinner, but suddenly changed her mind and decided to cut herself to death with a knife. Further, as I have already noted, on the body of the victim counted 24 penetrating wounds of varying depth, and forensic examinations showed that 10 of them were inflicted from the back, so if the girl was attacked from behind, and some of them were serious enough, and if they did not kill Ellen immediately, then certainly deprived her of the ability to move and resist. It is simply impossible to inflict such injuries on oneself, and then to stick a knife into one's heart to the hilt. And this caused medical experts to doubt the originally announced cause of death. However, despite this conclusion, the investigation continued to insist on the previous version and refused to initiate criminal proceedings. The main argument was the absence of traces of strangers in the apartment, as well as the absence of signs of self-defense. By the way, there were also some doubts about the possibility of penetration into the apartment, because the latch on the inner part of the door was also very peculiar. It could be closed from the outside, but not completely. If the latch had been closed from the inside all the way, it would have been impossible to break it out with a single blow of the shoulder without damaging the doorway. But, judging by the nature of the damage, it was only partially closed, and it could have been done from outside the door. Although the victim's spouse or partner is usually the prime suspect in such cases, Sam has always remained above suspicion. No charges were brought against him, and it was only on the day of the incident that he was interviewed at the station in the presence of his uncle, who, as already mentioned, was a well-known and influential lawyer. Moreover, the whole picture and sequence of events of that day was reconstructed only according to the words of Sam Goldberg, who at times was confused in his own testimony, but wrote everything off as stress. Neighbors confirmed only that they heard the knocking and screaming of a guy who could not get into the apartment and called his fiancée, but that's all. Sam further claimed during his testimony that he went to the security guard for help, and the guard went upstairs with him and saw him kicking down the door. But the guard denied this information, saying that he had not left his post. Strangely enough, but the investigation did not return to this issue, considering this detail irrelevant. A recording from only one surveillance camera leading to the gym was also checked. It shows Sam walking towards the gym and then walking back. But in the interval between these two events, he could well have gone out through another passage and then returned to the gym in the same way. However, his alibi was not checked, and possible witnesses who could confirm that he had been working out or deny it were not even looked for. Sam did not call the police until an hour later, after he found the door locked and his fiancée unresponsive to knocking and shouting. In addition, the officer who took the call noted that Sam was acting strangely. Despite the fact that he was screaming and wailing, the specialist thought that it was a feigned panic because Samuel was calm enough to answer questions and his voice was not shaking. When he was asked to start resuscitative measures, he first doubted the need to do so, then quieted down, and then, and after all, reported about a knife sticking out of his girlfriend's chest, which earlier he allegedly did not notice. It is noteworthy that before calling the police, The guy called his parents and his lawyer uncle, who arrived at the apartment before the police. To the station to testify, as already mentioned, Sam also went together with his uncle. In addition, the next day Sam went back to the sealed apartment with the same uncle to get some personal belongings and took out all of Ellen's gadgets. They took 2 laptops, a phone, and a tablet of the deceased. When the investigation suddenly decided to check these devices a few days later, it turned out that the search queries included topics related to voluntary demise. The police officers who arrived at the scene made only a cursory examination of the scene and concluded that Ellen had taken her own life. Subsequently, despite the emergence of new details, they refused to change their verdict. The order of the wounds could not be established, but it is certain that the final blow was a blow to the heart. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy found all this very strange, and he decided to conduct his own additional investigation, sending a sample of the spine of the deceased to a highly specialized specialist who could give a conclusion regarding the integrity of the spinal cord. If the spinal cord was damaged, then Ellen would be paralyzed and unable to stab herself in the heart. But soon the expert miraculously changed his mind and abandoned his investigation, stating that according to his report, the spinal cord had not been damaged. However, the conclusion itself was never attached to the case materials. It also didn't bother anyone that with such numerous and extensive wounds on Ellen's body, there was very little blood around, which could indicate that someone had wiped it off. But no one even bothered to look for possible washed-away marks. The luminol used in such cases was simply ignored. The trash cans in the apartment were also not examined, and if there was any evidence in them, they were lost forever. The unhappy parents were informed of the death of their only daughter by the Goldberg family, for they were the first on the scene. Ellen's family lived in another town, a couple 100 miles away from their daughter, but they arrived as quickly as they could. Santa and George couldn't believe what was happening and flatly denied that Ellen could have taken her own life. But the grief-stricken parents were never given a clear answer to the question of what happened that night with their daughter, only a dry conclusion and refusal to initiate criminal proceedings. Then the Greenbergs decided to conduct their own investigation with the involvement of independent specialists. Soon they were contacted by a private detective who offered his help completely free of charge because he himself wanted to understand this confusing case. The detective studied the materials and came to the conclusion that Ellen's body was moved after her death. This was evidenced by a dried blood trickle from her nose toward her ear. But Ellen was found in a sitting position, so the blood couldn't have traveled that way. He also found smeared stains on the floor, very similar to drag marks. In addition, after a second one, the guard remembered that Sam, who had asked for help, was wearing a tracksuit and said he had come back from the gym, but he was wearing boots.
He did not have a bag with a change of shoes with him. But despite the new evidence and witness testimony, the parents of the deceased were again denied a criminal case or further investigation. The Greenbergs were even denied case files, including a recording of Sam's phone call to the police, as well as surveillance footage showing the time he walked toward the gym and then returned from there. 4 years later, a new young officer has joined the county's homicide unit, taking a position as an assistant prosecutor. He had heard about the unsolved, strange case while he was still studying at the university, and now he decided to get materials from the archives and get to the truth. His attention was drawn to the injury to the back of the head, which could be the first to indicate that Ellen had been attacked from behind when she hadn't expected it. Also of interest to him was the note that there was no spinal cord injury, but there was no official document to prove it. All of the ADA's attempts to find any report regarding the spinal injuries were unsuccessful. It was allegedly lost somewhere in the archives. Then he made an official request to the Center of Forensic Medical Examination to get a duplicate of the document. And then it turned out that no one had ever given such a conclusion, and the body was not examined for spinal cord injuries. At the same time, a fragment of the spine had somehow miraculously been preserved and could be re-examined. An independent specialist was brought in and determined that the spinal cord had been damaged in several places at once, so that Ellen could not have inflicted further injuries on herself. The resulting materials were passed to the police, but there, after reviewing them, again refused to initiate criminal proceedings. In 2018, the coroner gave an official conclusion, which stated that all 20 wounds the deceased had inflicted on herself, and there can be no doubt about it. New investigation. Once again, at a stalemate of justice, the grief-stricken parents hired a new attorney with whom they recollected all the documents, previously unrecorded evidence, facts, and witness statements. In 2019, they filed a new lawsuit against the coroner and experts who had improperly done their jobs and effectively collapsed the case. The following spring, the lawsuit was heard and settled, but trials never began due to the pandemic raging around the world. It was expected that the case would be reclassified, but due to the negligence of the police and medical examiners, as well as the resulting confusion, crucial evidence was lost and irretrievably lost. The parents of the dead girl even created a page in the social network dedicated to the progress of the investigation, where they share official materials, new details, and versions. Family, friends, and colleagues of Ellen insist that she could not take her own life, and even do it in such a heinous way. Ellen, in principle, did not tolerate the sight of blood. It made her sick, and she also had a low pain threshold, because of which she has never done tattoos or piercings. In the summer of 2022, the case was dismissed again, but the Greenbergs got it transferred to the district attorney's office, where a new prosecutor took over. The investigation began again, 11 years after those terrible events, but to this day the investigation has never been finalized. How did Sam's fate turn out? For the first year after the tragedy, Samuel tried to keep in touch with his estranged father-in-law and mother-in-law. However, he did not take any part in the investigations initiated by them. He flatly refused to communicate with the police, and it seemed that he was not interested in the case. He himself adhered to the official version that his fiancée himself inflicted fatal injuries. Goldberg soon found solace with another girl, and just a year later married her. Together with his wife, he moved to another state and stopped contact with the Greenberg family. Now he and his wife are raising 2 children together, and about the dead ex-fiancé, Sam tries not to remember. What do you guys think? Is Sam responsible for Ellen's death? Lisa Maria Kaisa was born in 1994 in a large family where her 8 siblings also grew up. It was a large, but far from prosperous family. Parents were busy with their own problems and did not show love and care towards their children. Moreover, there were rumors that abuse and violence were rampant in the family. The story in question unfolded in the year 2020, at the very time when the whole world was consumed with the fight against COVID-19. In one corner of Ecuador, quietly and unnoticed, truly terrible events were unfolding. Here, in the small parish of Pifo, on the northeastern outskirts of Quito, the protagonist of this tragic story was born and raised. Lisa Maria Kaisa, a woman with an enigmatic gaze whose life story became a true Ecuadorian nightmare. On that unfortunate Tuesday, October 27, 2020, Lisa sent several messages to the father of her children, David. They were words full of despair, because their paths with David at that time had already almost parted. In these lines, she confessed her love for him and her unexpected new pregnancy. However, in subsequent messages, Lisa wrote that life was losing its meaning for her, and the decision to terminate the pregnancy was inevitable. Throughout the night, Lisa pleaded with David to come to her, but his refusal was resolute. His parents also urged him to stay home, and David took their advice. In the early morning hours of October 28th, neighbors in Lisa's home heard a faint cry for help. Looking out the window, they found a woman lying on the floor with signs of vomiting. The neighbors rushed to help her, immediately calling emergency services. The doctors and police arrived and found Lisa in a critical condition, but still alive. After administering first aid, she was immediately hospitalized. However, in the house, her children, a girl of 5 and a boy of 9, were found unconscious. The doctors were unable to help them. Their little hearts had stopped beating at that point. Authorities learned the identity of the children's father and contacted David Acosta, who, upon learning of the tragedy, immediately arrived on the scene accompanied by his father. He was informed that Lisa was in the hospital and his children were found without signs of life. After several days of fighting for life in the hospital, Lisa finally regained consciousness. By that time, the investigators, guided by their findings, had presented the prosecutor's office with sufficiently convincing arguments to issue an arrest warrant for this mysterious woman. When she was released from the hospital, she was immediately transferred to a social rehabilitation center. The authorities insisted that Lissa undergo a psychological and psychiatric evaluation, as her state of mind required further investigation as part of the upcoming trial. Lissa ended up in a rehabilitation center, and doctors and psychologists took up their work. In a conversation with a criminal psychologist, Lissa opened up about her difficult childhood, where her parents fought and abused each other and their children. Her childhood had a noticeable impact on her state of mind, and moments of quarrels and her parents' divorce became an integral part of her memories. Such a childhood forced Lissa to go to work from the age of 11 to be able to study. The girl strived to escape from her dysfunctional family and build her future in a different way. The expert report also indicated that Lissa had been abused. She talked about how, after several years of marriage, David, her husband, changed dramatically. He began to humiliate his spouse and then to raise his hand against her. On the day of the tragedy with the children, investigators working at the scene found several glasses with liquid residue on the table. These finds later revealed traces of epilepsy pills belonging to one of the children, as well as other chemicals requiring identification. Police officers thoroughly searched the house, and after noticing a strange odor in the kitchen, noticed a suspicious area under the utility room. They broke down the barrier and found a lifeless body wrapped in a blanket, with characteristic signs of having been there for a long time. Later, further investigation revealed that the discovered body belonged to Jaime Yanchaguano, a 28-year-old who had been in contact with Lissa. Jaime had been reported missing by his family days before the gruesome discovery. According to Rosa Yanchaguano, Jaime's sister, he was last seen on October 18th. Rosa told investigators that after her brother disappeared, Lissa called several times inquiring about him. Lissa claimed to have received a text message from Jaime in which he wrote how some illegal substance traffickers were holding him by force and demanding a ransom of $8,000. In doing so, she strongly cautioned Jaime's family against contacting the police. It became a key point in a complex investigation that required detectives to not only solve the tragedy, but to find out if there were any other hidden victims in the story. During her interrogation, Lissa said that in 2020, while working in a cookie factory, she met Jaime Yanchaguano. According to her, he became just a friend. Lissa sought to return to her husband, who was allegedly going to blackmail Jaime to get money from him. David made it clear to his wife that if she did not help him, he would divorce her. Later, David handed Lissa a white powder and told her to slip it into Jamie's food. When the task was completed, Jaime fell asleep and never woke up again. Realizing what had happened, Lissa tried in desperation to get her husband back, but all was unsuccessful, so she swallowed the same poison and gave it to her children. However, it did not have the expected effect on her, and Lissa turned to her neighbors for help, trying to save herself from the same horror that had befallen her children. After her testimony, investigators launched an investigation, but no evidence of David's involvement in the events was ever found. No one close to the couple could have predicted that Lissa Maria and David Acosta's fate would lead them through such a difficult ordeal. When they met, Lissa was only 16 years old and still in high school. She was a dreamy and romantic girl, and David was a strong and determined young man. Soon their friendship developed into strong feelings, and this led to Lissa's unexpected pregnancy. Although the young people's families did not approve of their relationship, David's parents always supported their son and welcomed Lissa into their family. In difficult moments, David's family became a true support for the young couple. Inviting Lissa to live with them, they made every effort to make sure she finished high school. When Lissa turned 18, the lovers got married. 2 years later, the young family was waiting for the appearance of a second child, a little daughter. David's parents decided to provide the young couple with their own housing. They gave Lissa and David a separate apartment, which became for them a corner of family happiness. But over time, the couple's relationship began to deteriorate. It was obvious that both spouses sinned of cheating, which led to mistrust and disappointment. Boundless love, which seemed unshakable, began to weaken. To make matters worse, Lissa complained of psychological abuse from David, which led her to seek help from the police. Eventually, she was granted a protective order, and David was forced to leave the family home. It was at this point that Lissa began to use her position and blackmail David, demanding money for the opportunity to see their joint children. The beginning of September 2020 brought an unexpected challenge into Lissa's life that drastically changed her daily routine. The young mother discovered that her oldest son was suffering from seizures, and in desperation, she went to the emergency room at Paula Ortega Hospital. After stabilizing the baby's condition, the doctors decided to conduct a series of tests, revealing a focal form of epilepsy, a severe disease that affects a specific part of the brain. The doctors urged Lissa to undergo additional tests, including MRI scans, and to consult with specialists as soon as possible. However, the mother, as if ignoring the seriousness of the situation, decided not to follow these recommendations. A month later, the situation was repeated. Lissa was back in the emergency room with her son suffering from the same symptoms. After reviewing the boy's medical history, the doctors discovered that the mother had somehow failed to fulfill the prescriptions given to her earlier. No tests had been taken, consultations with specialists had not taken place, and it seems that the son had not received the necessary treatment. The doctors, concerned for the child's welfare, once again reminded Lissa of the importance of following medical advice. They warned her that ignoring the doctor's advice could lead to legal consequences, as she could be putting her son's health and well-being at risk. However, this time too, Lissa disregarded the doctor's warning. A couple weeks after discovering her son's illness, she decided to call David. The serious tone in her voice worried David. She informed him that a social worker would be coming to see her shortly to discuss their son's diagnosis and retirement. On the day of the appointment, David showed up, but the social worker was long gone. To brighten the waiting time, Lissa offered him a drink. However, as David drank the drink, he suddenly felt unwell. His condition was worsening, and the social worker had not shown up, so David decided to go home to get something to deal with his discomfort. The next morning, David woke up in a terrible state. He could barely speak because his tongue was numb. Every step caused discomfort, and his eyes hurt. His parents insisted on calling an ambulance. David was taken to the hospital where he spent several days. Tests revealed the presence of a psychoactive substance in his system, but given that he hadn't used anything of the sort, David began to speculate how this could have happened. Eventually, he speculated that perhaps someone had deliberately slipped him some substance in a public place. David was grateful for his life and realized that what had happened could have ended much worse. In early October 2020, Lissa made the decision to hire a nanny for her children. Her cousin Patricia recommended her friend Bertha, a responsible 48-year-old woman looking for work. On Monday, October 5th, Bertha arrived at the young mother's house. Lissa urged her to take a pill that she said helped prevent infection with the COVID-19 virus, an epidemic of which was at its height at the time. Claiming that it was a highly effective natural remedy, Lissa convinced Bertha to swallow the medicine and enter the house. They sat down to discuss the babysitter's childcare duties. A few minutes later, Bertha began to feel sick. She felt a headache, her stomach began to upset, and eventually she vomited. A short while later, Patricia showed up. It turned out that she had called her cousin repeatedly, but Lissa didn't answer, which alerted Patricia. She decided to check what had happened and immediately went to her house. Upon entering, she found Bertha lying on the couch, who was practically fainting already. Lissa shared with her cousin what had happened and expressed concern. Learning that Lissa still had not called an ambulance, Patricia immediately did so herself. After a while, doctors arrived and sent Bertha to the hospital. The condition of the victim managed to stabilize. Doctors diagnosed poisoning with a toxic substance, which often happens when using various medications. Doctors decided that Bertha did not tolerate some component of the composition of the pills from COVID-19. A few months before this tragic incident, in June of the same year, Lissa's former buddy, Marc Richardson, had died of poisoning. At the time, the cause of his death had gone unnoticed, but now, given all these strange circumstances, Marc's case required additional attention. Investigators scrutinized the deceased's home and found Lissa's fingerprints on the glasses used the night before Marc's death. This fact added new evidence to the investigation, pointing to Lissa's possible involvement in the incident. But suddenly, a new accusation was made against Lissa. Her own family made a shocking report to the police. It turns out that on September 2nd, the family had a family gathering where Lissa offered to let everyone taste a drink of her own making. 7 brothers and sisters of the young woman, as well as their parents, drank the unknown drink and immediately felt sick. Fortunately, no one died, but the 56-year-old mother suffered a stroke.
Lissa's father claimed that while the relatives were seeking medical attention, his daughter stole $1,300 from the house. Now the investigation included not only crimes against the children and a former boyfriend, but also an incident that jeopardized the lives and health of her own family members. As it turned out, that wasn't all. Investigators encountered another strange event. In May of that year, Jose Luis Erazo, a friend of Lissa's, was found dead in his home. A few days before, Jose had suddenly disappeared, and neighbors soon smelled a rotting odor, prompting them to contact the authorities. An examination of the body initially revealed nothing suspicious, and was ruled a heart attack. But one of Jose's sisters suspected something strange, and hid a bottle of alcohol found in the refrigerator. In addition, Jose's family noticed that some items were missing from the house. It turned out that Lissa and Jose were friends, and when the guy died, the alleged killer contacted his relatives by phone. With a distraught voice, she stated that Jose owed her a large sum of money, and she had to contact the family to repay the debt. This cunning plan did not work, and a little later Lissa called Jose's family again, changing her voice to conceal her identity. Identifying herself as Jose's friend, she claimed that she was pregnant by him and now had to apply for child support. Although Jose's family did not believe these stories, Lissa was not about to give up and made a third attempt to deceive them. She said she knew who was responsible for Jose's death and offered to meet to uncover the details. Had she not been arrested on charges of killing her own children in Jaime, the list of victims might have gotten longer. When the media reported the arrest of Lissa, who had poisoned 3 people, Jose's relatives understood. They immediately reported their suspicions to the authorities, and Jose's body was exhumed for forensic examination to determine the true cause of death. The relatives were not mistaken. Traces of poison were found in the remains of the deceased. On December 22, 2020, a hearing was held for Lissa Maria Kaisa for the murder of her 2 children, whose names and photos were classified, and for Jaime Yanchaguano. The trial was conducted virtually due to restrictions related to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Lissa had been in contact from a social rehabilitation center. The prosecutor's statement said that Lissa gave her children a toxic mixture of insecticides and anti-epileptic drugs. In interrogations, she claimed that she had grown desperate and could not leave her children with her husband David, who did not care for the children. In fact, she admitted that she wished them dead. At the end of the hearing, the judge issued the defendant a court pass and ordered her remanded into custody pending trial. The children's trial next took place in 2021 at the Pichincha Provincial Court. The prosecutor presented a set of evidence to prove Lissa's guilt. Among them were statements by David, who revealed the content of messages the wife had received on the eve of the tragedy. In one of the messages, she claimed that she would take with her what belonged to her, referring to the children. She said she didn't know where her children and herself would go, heaven or hell. But now she felt as if she was in hell. Lissa added that she doesn't expect her husband to forgive her because she knows he hated her, and now he will hate her even more. David also spoke about his unstable relationship with his wife. At the hearing, the defendant's reconstructed testimony was presented, stating that she took 2 pills that day, called for help, and then passed out. According to the reconstruction conducted by the prosecutor's office, the daughter died while still in bed, and her older brother tried to take a few steps to call for help, but fell and died. The conclusion of the forensic medical examination was extremely clear. The children died as a result of a premeditated crime. The deaths were the result of suffocation caused by pulmonary edema and intoxication caused by a mixture of epilepsy medication and other unspecified substances, presumably insecticides and disinfectant. The prosecution also charged Lissa with the death of Jaime Ianchaguano, whose body was found bricked up in the kitchen.
The perpetrator was also suspected of attempting to kill David and members of her own family. The hearing raised the issue of Lissa's irresponsible attitude to her son's health after being diagnosed with localized epilepsy. The mother ignored instructions for further tests and follow-up examinations, and when the boy was hospitalized again, his condition was exacerbated by her own mother's negligence. Warnings from medical professionals did not change her attitude toward her son's treatment, leading to a threatened termination of her parental rights. Lissa's mental health investigations revealed her to be highly emotional and environmentally dependent. She sought constant attention and understanding from others and experienced severe anxiety when events did not unfold according to her plan. She also exhibited a tendency to self-harm. She attempted to say goodbye to her life at least 3 times, but was unsuccessful each time. Witnesses described her as insecure, attachment-seeking, exhibiting schizoid and erratic behavior. The findings of the psychological analysis also emphasized that on the day of the tragic events, Lissa acted with full awareness of her actions. After a long trial that lasted 10 months, Lisa Maria Kaisa was found guilty of the crime against her children. The Pichincha Provincial Court sentenced her to 34 years and 8 months imprisonment. In addition to this, she was ordered to pay David a compensation of more than $20,000. It was noted in the press that Lisa remained calm throughout the proceedings and only showed emotion when her children were mentioned. The Jaime Yanchaguano murder case, which began in August 2021, appeared to be unfinished. New details were revealed during the court hearings. Lissa admitted giving her friend a white substance mixed with alcohol, but claimed she got it from David. However, the investigation proved otherwise. According to a psychiatrist who interviewed Lissa, she did not want to take Jaime's life. She wanted to intimidate his family so she could then extort money. She did demand $8,000 as ransom. Experts called the plan disorganized, which ultimately led to the crime. In addition, forensic tests revealed that it wasn't that simple. Jaime was found to have poison in his system, and the cause of death was strangulation. The body was found with a shattered ribcage and wire around the neck. Lissa claimed that after her friend died, she decided to bury him under a back room and cement him in. The store owner's testimony confirmed that Lissa bought building materials during the days of Jaime's disappearance. After the parties' arguments, the prosecutor's office requested a new trial in April 2022. At that trial, an additional charge of extortion was filed. Lissa called Jaime's relatives, claiming he was being held by a group of gangsters, and demanded $8,000 for his release. The defense relied on the lack of conclusive evidence that Lissa was involved in Jaime's murder. Nevertheless, she was found guilty and received a 22-year prison sentence, as well as a sentence to pay $5,000 to the victim's mother. While Jaime's trial was underway, the investigation of Marc Escanto and Jose Luis Erazo, Lissa's alleged victims, was nearing completion. Marc Escanto was 48 years old, and tests conducted after his death revealed traces of the same substance that Lissa had given to her children. In addition, Marc was found to have severe inflammation of the stomach. The family's lawyer claimed that Lissa met Marc, offered him a beer, and then put the poison in the drink. A glass with Lissa and Marc's fingerprints, as well as a swab containing the woman's DNA, was provided to authorities. Alleged motives for the murder included jealousy and money. It is also known that Lissa had asked Marc to help her financially, and there was evidence that he loaned her at least $120. Marc was Lissa's first known victim. The final outcome of this case, as well as that of Jose Luis Erazo, remain unknown. They may not have been reported in the press, or the investigation may not yet have reached the stage of being formally charged and brought to trial. At the time of her brutal crimes, Lissa Maria was only 26 years old. Her high-profile criminal case has become one of the most horrific and disturbing in Ecuador's recent history. These crimes made her known throughout the country as Doña Venado. Lissa Maria Kaisa is recognized as a serial killer in Ecuador. Her victims have endured terrible suffering, and their relatives have suffered unbearable pain. The charges include 5 murders and 9 attempted murders. Under Ecuadorian law, the maximum sentence she could face is 40 years in prison. That means Lissa could be released when she turned 70 years old. It is still unclear what motivated Doña Venado to commit such horrific acts. Was her act the result of resentment for not getting what she expected in life? Many speculate that the motive was money, and in David's case, Lissa acted out of a lust for revenge, which led to the tragedy with her children. The most horrific part of this story is not only the number of victims left in the path of Doña Venado, but also the fate of two innocent children who could not have guessed that their mother, who gave them life, would take it away so absurdly and cruelly. Ryan Smith was born in 1975 in San Diego, California, USA. From a young age, he was an adventurous adventurer, passionate about traveling and getting to know different cultures around the world. This passion to discover the diversity of people through customs, languages, and tradition, and prompted Ryan to immigrate from his country. At the age of 27, this young man sought to get acquainted with the life of the countries of Eurasia, especially those that belonged to the collapsed Soviet Union. So in 2022, Ryan went with his backpack and dreams in tow to remote Azerbaijan, one of the countries of the former Soviet Union. The country, surrounded by the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains, is located at what can be considered the crossroads of Eastern Europe and Western Asia. So, for a young traveler, it was an ideal starting point for the world he intended to discover. Ryan settled in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, where he studied the language and culture. On his web portal, he described how at that time he worked at a carpet market surrounded by a walled city, and this allowed him to get acquainted with one of the oldest and most valuable craft practices in the region. The methods of making carpets are passed down from generation to generation, and it can be said that this is a tradition that has almost disappeared over time. The young designer was impressed by the beauty of the products and thought about the business associated with the manufacture of handmade carpets. In December 2005, Ryan, mindful of his idea, returned to the United States to lay the foundations of the project. While on American soil, he met a young and attractive teacher, Laura Joy, with whom he got engaged, and then married her. Laura supported her husband's hobbies of travel and foreign culture, and in 2011, the couple visited the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, which borders Azerbaijan. In Georgia, in the city of Marneuli, young people got married, and both intended to establish the production of traditional carpets there. The couple had a son in 2014, whom their young parents named Caleb, and at the same time Ryan and Laura were promoting their long-awaited handmade carpet weaving project. The project, developed by an American using traditional Azerbaijani methods, everything made using this technology could be sold on the international market for more than $1,000. While Laura worked as an English teacher at a local public school, her husband toured the villages of the region in search of weavers willing to work with them. To his surprise, Ryan did not find many masters using traditional methods. Some of those who first joined the plan refused to cooperate for various reasons. Some did not agree with the prices that Ryan offered, while others were not familiar with the original designer and were not sure they could produce what the brand needed. Ryan said in his blog that he spent 4 days in Kosalari, and it was there that he found artisans interested in his project. Ryan's goal was not only to make a profit or to save the development of an ancient culture. He was also interested in becoming something of a public benefactor, attracting women in rural areas who know ancient weaving techniques to his project, giving them the opportunity to revive the craft that would allow them to support their families. Soon, Ryan and Laura Smith became one of the most respected, and the visiting American considered a city with a population of no more than 20,000 people to be the most expensive place for himself. His wife, Laura, became close to the city, with its residents engaged in teaching, made many friends, while Ryan, promoting the value of the ancient carpet weaving culture, earned respect. Most residents considered the Smith couple kind and honest people to whom they could turn for help. A couple of visiting Americans got so used to the local society, traditions, and culture that in 2012 they applied for citizenship and soon became citizens of the United States and Georgia. It was rumored that the couple planned to build a kindergarten with a playground on their own money. But it was at a time when the couple had already decided that they had finally found a home, realized that the future of their family was promising, A tragedy knocked on their doors, and all their plans collapsed in the most unexpected and nightmarish way. In July 2018, 43-year-old Ryan and 42-year-old Laura planned to take a couple of days off to enjoy a vacation next to little Caleb and get away from the routine. Sabina Talibuba, Laura's friend, said that Laura called her on Wednesday, July 4th, shared her plans to go to the mountains, and warned them that they would be gone for 2 days. The couple chose a small, picturesque place, hidden from the eyes, near the Gudori Mountains as their destination. This area is known for its trails, beautiful waterfalls, and stunning gorges, ideal for relaxing walks and picnics in nature. In this secluded corner, instead of being distracted and finding peace of mind, the Smith family experienced their worst nightmare. Ryan and Laura were looking for a local resident who would serve as their guide so that they could not get lost, and calmly, without fear, traveled in mountainous places. And the parents were also concerned about the safety of little Caleb. I would like the journey not to be exhausting and uncomfortable for the baby. So they met with a local shepherd, Malchus Kabauri, who, although he did not live in this area, but, despite the young age of 19, knew the neighborhood well, because he traveled around them daily and grazed herds of sheep and goats. Malchus was distinguished by a calm character. The locals considered him a good guy. Confident in the positive reviews about Malchus, who knew the area, the Smith family hired him as a guide. It had not been long since their departure to the mountains when the couple found out about Malchus's dark intentions and claims. As it became known later, the group went out on the mountain, and having reached the clearing, set up camp for dinner. They chose a place near one of the many springs in the area to have fresh water quenching their thirst in the summer heat. Obviously, at some point Ryan paid attention to his guide, because he felt that he was not careful enough with the gun, which he always carried with him. There was a heated discussion between the two men, and no one expected Malchus to point a gun at Ryan and shoot him in the head. Then he fired another shot at the man in the back. Laura's terrified screams and the baby's crying drowned out the echoes of gunfire, rumbling in the mountains, but the worst was yet to come. Despite the woman's pleas, Malchus put the muzzle of the gun to Caleb's head and fired at point-blank range. Frightened and unaware of what had just happened in front of her, Laura turned to stone, but when she saw Malchus's cold gaze, she understood his true intentions. Her instinct for self-preservation worked. Laura ran as fast as she could to avoid the fate of her husband and son. But when she reached the edge of the waterfall cliff, she realized that she had no way out, and there was no way for her to escape. The shepherd used a weapon to force the woman to violence, and then allegedly pushed her off a cliff. Laura's body fell on the bank of the waterfall. According to the subsequent investigation, Malchus took Caleb's body and buried it in a secluded place, sending the murder weapon there as well. Then the shepherd returned to the village as if nothing had happened. Laura's friend Sabine began to worry when, after 3 days, Laura did not return from a family trip. Sabine tried to call Ryan or Laura, but she never got an answer. Ryan's entourage was also confused, as it was very unusual for him to be away for so long without contacting anyone. On Friday, July 6th, the Center for Rapid Response and Emergency Situations received a message about the possible disappearance of a Georgian family of American origin in the mountains. The caller was Sabine, who said that the Smith family had been in the mountains for more than 2 days with their little son of 4 years old, and they could not be contacted by phone. A team of 15 rescuers was sent to the gorge to search, where presumably a family was missing. Upon arrival in the designated area, rescuers found Laura's belongings and car, but moving further along the route of the small group, the searchers found a terrible find. A lifeless body lay at the foot of the waterfall. Confused rescuers stepped up rescue efforts and expanded the search area. A human corpse was found about 800 meters from the waterfall. The humidity and heat inherent in the season accelerated the decomposition of the body, so the initial report of the authorities was that the victims showed no signs of violence. In accordance with the Criminal Code of Georgia, an investigation was launched, but nothing was known about the couple's child yet. It took another 3 days when the fate of the defenseless baby became clear. investigators managed to find out that Malchus was the last person with whom the family communicated. A 19-year-old shepherd was detained and told during interrogation that he knew where Caleb was. 4 days after the Smith family went to the mountains, Malchus led investigators to the place where he buried Caleb, as well as the weapon. The next day, the Georgian police released a statement saying that a young shepherd, Malchus Kabauri, had been taken into custody, and he was accused of murdering the Smith family. The news of the murder of a married couple and their son shocked Georgia, especially Marnuli and the community of weavers. The American consulate also expressed its alarm over this crime. In fact, the FBI team participated in the investigation together with the Georgian authorities and cooperated in the search and processing of evidence. On July 11th, the Tbilisi Municipal Court decided to place Malchus, who pleaded not guilty to the charges, under arrest. The conductor claimed that the real killers of the family were 2 foreigners who arrived in a black car. Allegedly, these people killed the Smith family, threatened to kill him and his family if he reported to the police, and left Malchus alive so that suspicion of a triple murder fell on the shepherd. Violence against Laura was rejected by Malchus's lawyer, because according to the guy, he was not capable of such a thing, since he was a virgin. On July 12th, family, friends, and activists of public organizations gathered in front of Ryan's house in Marmilli with toys, flowers, and lit candles to express condolences and remember the victims. The next day, Malchus's lawyer confirmed the innocence of the accused. He continued to claim that the crime was committed by 2 foreigners, and that the psychological pressure exerted on his client forced Malchus to initially plead guilty. But evidence against Malchus began to appear one after another. The most convincing evidence of Malchus's guilt was the autopsy report of the victims. It was found that Ryan's body had 2 gunshot wounds, one in the head and one in the back. Caleb was shot in the head at point-blank range. In Laura's case, violence against her was proven, and DNA tests confirmed that the biological material found in her body and on her underwear belonged to Malchus. The DNA of Ryan and the defendant were also found on the murder weapon. In addition, a technical examination conducted by the FBI on the phones of the victims and their alleged killer showed that there were photos of Laura's lifeless body at the waterfall in the memory of Malchus's phone. The shepherd even showed them to several local acquaintances, to whom he said that he had accidentally stumbled upon a corpse while walking through these places. Experts found in the search history and the phone that a few days before this incident, Malchus had visited various sites of an intimate nature. All this led investigators to the conclusion that the motive of the crime was the young man's interest in Laura, and that his actions were deliberate from the very moment when the Smith family contacted Malchus to take them to the waterfall. After the release of the autopsy results, Malchus's lawyer, David, resigned, saying that for reasons of principle he could not defend the shepherd. David was replaced by another lawyer, who from that moment led the case. He insisted on the client's innocence and filed a motion to withdraw Malchus's previous confession. The shepherd's mother, Mariana, supported her son and agreed with the lawyer that the police may have forced the guy to confess to the crime under threat of imprisonment. Relatives of the suspect claimed that because of a high-profile crime, the authorities accused Malchus in order to close the case. However, on November 9, 2018, Malchus was charged with the murder of 3 members of the Smith family. He was also charged with additional charges of violence against Laura. The psychological examination conducted on the young shepherd showed that he is sane, healthy, and ready for trial. The term of pre-trial detention expired on April 9, 2019, but the prosecutor said that Bay had strong evidence of Malchus's guilt and that he would be punished for such a terrible crime. A meeting of 12 members of the court on March 25, 2019, unanimously ruled that Malchus was guilty of premeditated murder with extreme cruelty of more than 2 people. He committed premeditated murder in order to conceal another crime, namely intimate assault. On March 27, 2019, the judge of the Gori District announced the decision to sentence to life imprisonment. While the relatives of the criminal protested against the life sentence, which they considered unfair, the sentence became a relief for friends and relatives of the Smith family, and defense lawyers announced that they would appeal the verdict to the appellate instances in connection with alleged procedural violations. The U.S. consul in Georgia said that the verdict provided justice for the Smith family, adding that the evidence left no doubt about Malchus's guilt. Since the arrival of Ryan and Laura Smith in Georgia, these people have won the love and respect of the residents of Marnuli, and their brutal murder has dealt a blow to the community that the couple chose as their home. The community project developed by Ryan not only revived an ancient tradition, but also provided many women with a source of income and stability. The death of the spouses plunged into sadness and uncertainty dozens of women who aspired to a successful business. Shortly after the terrible events that claimed the lives of the founders, the project was revived by foreign investors who support Ryan's ideas and offer opportunities for local craftsmen. Ryan and Laura left behind the world they knew in the West, hoping to discover cultural treasures, and while they were greeted by grateful members of the community, their fate crossed with a sinister creature who hid his essence behind the guise of a kind shepherd.